What brand are you never giving your money to again, and why? I run the front desk at a hotel, and Expedia are an absolute nightmare. They also just straight up lie to the guests and to the hotels constantly. Truly one of the most shady companies I've ever dealt with. They purposely try and deceive people who don't know any better into thinking that they're dealing with the hotel directly. They create ads in such a way that when people Google the hotel's phone number, a number to Expedia comes up, and if the customer asks if they're speaking directly with the hotel front desk, they will just say yes. There have been countless times where guests have called to cancel their reservation that was booked through Expedia. I inform them that they'll have to contact Expedia directly since they prepaid through them, but that it will be no issue because the hotel doesn't charge a penalty fee for cancellation. An Expedia representative will call the hotel with the guest on hold and ask about getting it cancelled. I tell them it's no problem. Then they ask if we'll be charging that penalty fee and I tell them no. So all is right and good, right? Nope. I then get a call back from the guest who's upset, saying that the Expedia representative told them that they couldn't be refunded because of the fee charged by the hotel's cancellation policy, taking the guest's money, blaming it on the hotel, and keeping all of the profit. This has happened countless times. I once had a guest, while out at the front desk, call about cancelling 3 days out of a multiple-day reservation, as she had to leave earlier than expected. They pulled the same bullcrap with her, not knowing that she was at the front desk. After me telling the representative that the cancellation is fine and we won't be charging any penalties, they get back on the phone with her and blatantly lie. I asked her to hand the phone to me, and that was quite a surprise for the representative, who said that, there must have been a misunderstanding. We bought a flea medicine from Hearts to use on our cat, and she became lethargic and didn't eat anything. We took her to the vet, and they told us that they'd been trying to get that medicine off the shelves because of how it affects the animals. I was in a theater watching Despicable Me when my cat finally passed away. It sucked knowing that my cat was dead because some money-hungry brand didn't care about the safety of the animals it was giving its products to. Pyrethrins are toxic to cats. I nearly killed my cat with Hearts ear mite solution 15 years ago, and it's still on the market. Why Hearts hasn't been sued out of existence, I will never understand. If I see something is being shipped by OnTrack, I'll cancel. The 3 times they were the delivery company from Amazon, they lost one package completely and tried to say it wasn't their fault. The second package was also deemed lost, but then showed up on my doorstep something like 6 weeks later. The third time it sat on shipping label created for a week, and I just contacted Amazon and cancelled the package. You don't find a lot of positive reviews out there, and any positive ones you do find seem like they were written by the company via a fake account. It looks like they were bought out shortly after this comment was made, and then the company who made the purchase changed the name of the combined businesses back to OnTrack after consuming them. Why you'd want to be associated with this level of service is a mystery to me. Maybe they've got less crappy since then, I don't know. I used to be a health inspector. In my first year, a lot of my old favorite restaurants were ruined for me, but none so bad as the discount sushi place my college bestie and I used to frequent. They had roaches bad. In my time at the health department, I never saw them worse than in that kitchen. We got calls about the roaches at least twice a month, and every time we went, they were back with a vengeance. They were closed for them multiple times, but just never kept up with the pest control and cleaning necessary to get rid of them. They were also dyeing tilapia red and selling it as snapper on their menu. This is pretty common around here, but it's super illegal because it's literal false advertising. Fun fact, some people are allergic to tilapia specifically. Not sure I want to be around when that restaurant owner finds that out. They had hundreds of cardboard boxes stacked outside their back door, plus a bunch of old equipment they aren't using. This added to the roach problem, and any day it could turn into a rodent problem. One time I drove by and they had animal cages back there as well. I don't want to know the story behind that. Add to that, I'm pretty sure the employees were all indentured servants or victims of human trafficking. They all show up in the same beat-up white van every day and work a 12-plus hour shift. The owner is very unkind to them and they don't respect him. He says he can trust them to do their jobs, but was sketchy when we said to fire them and hire employees who'll do their jobs properly. We never had proof, but it was always upsetting and struck me as off. He tried to bribe me and my coworkers multiple times too. I'm not a health inspector anymore, but he still tries to give me free food or money when he sees me. He opened a new restaurant and I didn't know it was his. So my friend and I went to go check it out. I was told that the appetizers were free for me only. Then I saw him in the back. We had to leave. Never again. It's too sketchy and too likely to get me sick. Comcast. A door-to-door salesman straight up lied to my dad, saying they had a 4 DVR setup that would cost less than what we were paying at AT&T. When the installation guy got there, he said that no, they didn't have a 4 DVR setup. He was told to give us the standard 2 DVR setup, which was absolutely not something that would work in a house with 6 people with wildly different tastes and TV shows. So my dad tells him, never mind, we're sticking with AT&T then. But because the Comcast guy had already installed our new cable box, he couldn't take it back with him. So we had to mail it back to Comcast ourselves. The kicker is that 5 years later, Comcast tried to bill my parents for the cable box, saying we never sent it back. My parents insisted they did, and Comcast wanted the UPS receipt, which obviously we no longer had because it was 5 years ago, and we hadn't heard anything from them before this. So my parents refused to pay. Comcast sent a collections company after us, and when my parents explained the situation to the collection company, they were like, "Those motherfrickers. We'll take care of this." That was, thankfully, the end of it. Lyft. They recently charged me a damage fee for the damages I couldn't have plausibly caused. I sent statements explaining how it couldn't have been me. They sent back a standardized statement and didn't give me any additional information. There's no phone line to talk to a representative. I sent them multiple follow-up emails which they never responded to. Now I have to write a statement for my credit card company to dispute the charge. Yeah, I had one where the driver tried handing me free water, the bottle fell out of his hand and some water spilled on me and the seat. 2 weeks later, I got a charge of $129 for damage. Let me tell you, I went absolutely crazy. I told them I'll see them in court and they changed their tune. I never had to pay them. I hate them. Warning, disgusting story ahead. I went to Dickey's barbecue pit. Their food isn't amazing, but I was craving southern food and my suburban town in California doesn't have many options. So me and my girlfriend buy some sandwiches and have them for dinner. They're cold and they taste like salty sweat. The next day, I have uncontrollable stinky liquid coming out of both ends of my body multiple times an hour. If I was alone, I would have gone to the emergency room, but my dad's a nurse and was home. I chucked up something like 20 times in the whole day and kept dry heaving afterwards. The diarrhea came so fast and uncontrolled that it ruined multiple pairs of undies and a rug that was by the toilet. Why my dad has rugs in the bathroom, I don't know, but I ruined it when I bent over the toilet. It took only a day for me to feel better, and I was already eating heavy foods again, but lo and behold, guess who comes over to see me well again, and also craps herself in my bathroom? My girlfriend, the only other person who ate at Dickey's. So I spent the rest of the day, after having just pooped and spewed myself to death, helping my girlfriend while she was experiencing the same. I think we're closer to each other after that experience. In short, ate at Dickey's barbecue pit, pooped and blew chunks, ruining clothes and a rug. My girlfriend came over and did the exact same thing as me. Wayfair. Purchased a $1,000 sectional couch that was delivered with damaged upholstery. They refused to let me return it and instead offered me 10% off my next purchase. I'm never using that discount code. They refused to let you return it? Screw that. Dispute the charge. Not enough people know that you can dispute charges through your bank. Honestly, the narrator had basically forgotten that this was an option as well. Well, now we've been informed, folks. Don't let these companies push you around. There were several more testimonials of how Wayfair had refused refunds and then apparently backed right down as soon as the banks got involved. I bought an engine from AutoZone for a vehicle I owned. They had a vendor build the engine, and it was supposed to ship to my house. I waited 3 weeks for it to arrive, but it never did. I contacted their store. I was told that it hadn't shipped yet and was coming via FedEx Freight. I kept up with the tracking number, but couldn't get anywhere with it. I kept calling back every couple of days to see what was going on, and nobody could figure it out. I finally managed to find out that it had shipped via another company, RL Freight, and had been delivered to somewhere else. It was like pulling teeth to get a refund on an engine I never received. It took another 2 weeks to get the refund. I won't buy a soda from AutoZone now. Yeah, I got three bad starters in a row from them. I thought I was losing my frickin' mind. The fourth came from a dealership and it's still in the truck 4 years later. JDM Racing Motors gave me a damaged motor and claimed a compression test was the only way to test the engine and said that it passed. Barely held on in one cylinder. To make matters worse, if you put coolant in where it ought to go, it would come out of the oil pan. Made a few calls and had email exchanges with their mechanics, and was informed the coolant and oil touch regularly and that's how it cools the oil. It's just wrong on so many levels. Never got my money back either, so I ended up using the good parts from the exterior to rebuild my old engine. 1-800-Flowers. Screw them so hard. They waited several days after I placed an order for Mother's Day flowers to tell me that they wouldn't be able to fulfill the order. They waited until the day before, putting me in a bad position. Now, I Google my mom's zip, add flowers, and have a few choices. I call the local shops directly, and 1-800-Flowers is cut out of the process. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Florist here, 100% do not use places like 1-800-Flowers or ProFlowers. You will never get what you ordered, and they destroy local floral businesses by cheating them on money and business. Basically, what happens is they advertise and take orders for flower arrangements, and then send those orders to local florists through Teleflora or FTD, while keeping a majority of the price. For example, they'll charge you $50 for a floral arrangement and will show you a picture of an arrangement that in reality costs about $70. Then they send it to a local florist and give the florist about $30 to make that exact same arrangement and tell them to just substitute as necessary. So the florist has two options. Either make the arrangement as pictured and take $20 to $40 loss, or make the arrangement for the value given to them by the site and risk an upset customer. Either way, us local florists lose and look bad. Now, florists can reject the orders, which is probably what happened to your order because they weren't giving the florists enough and they didn't want to take the hit on Mother's Day. But if they reject it, they lose money and business, which isn't always feasible for small floral shops that need the money. The cherry on top is that if something is wrong, we have to make it right and give them what they want and hope 1-800-Flowers pays us back for it. It's incredibly crappy for customers and florists alike, and it should be illegal. Frontier Internet. They're one of the crappiest ISPs I've ever had. I will never go back, no matter how cheap it is. I have Frontier. I stopped paying them like 3 years ago, and they continue to give me service. They are so disorganized that they have no idea. I almost switched from Comcast to Frontier just for the cable only. My install day came, and I was given a 4-hour window, and nobody showed up. I waited around 2 hours after the window, and then finally called, and they said, "Oh, the installer got busy and we need to reschedule. We can do it 2 weeks from now." I told them to cancel my installation because it didn't really seem like they wanted my business. You know, a company's got to be a special kind of freaking incompetent to make Comcast the preferable option. Macy's. I got a credit card through them to buy a suit. My parents offered to pay the card off as a birthday present. Cue months of them calling me 5+ times a day asking where the payment that had already been made was, harassing me to make more and larger payments. When it was finally paid off, they then tacked on a completed fee charge and never sent a bill, so the whole damn thing started all over. I was genuinely about to file a lawsuit over harassment or something. It was unbelievable, because I'd tell one person the payment was made and then get 4 more calls the same day asking the same thing. Then rinse and repeat tomorrow. Spirit Airlines. Never again. Frick them. A flight from Vegas got cancelled. This was one of many incidents I've had to deal with them. This one just broke me because I was flying from Vegas. I can only handle Vegas for 2 nights. After that, I want the F out of there. Having to stay there another night wasn't something I wanted to do. It wasn't weather-related, as they made a point of telling me. No other flights into Detroit that day were cancelled. I checked. I even told that to the customer service agent, and he shrugged it off. They don't even bother trying to put you on another flight. Not only that, you have to pay extra for the next flight available. I told them they can go F themselves and I want a refund. The customer service person told me he can refund me Spirit credit, and that's when I lost it. After enough complaining, he gave me my money back on my credit card and I bought a flight on Delta. LuLaRoe. I only bought stuff to help out a friend who was trying to make ends meet. Luckily, she quit after about a year. I bought 3 pairs of leggings over the course of the year, and none of them made it the year without holes. $25 each. Never again. My friend spent almost $20,000 to start up for LuLaRoe. She ended up not selling very much, and they don't let you return the unused product for full price, only half price. I'm glad she's not selling it anymore because I have the same complaint about the quality of the clothes. Absolute garbage pyramid scheme. Folks, read the terms and conditions. I can't believe how many people fall for these damn things still. Like, I think these things were a joke in the 90s and noughties, and that hasn't changed. It's just a damn shame that despite the very public knowledge about what an MLM is, people have continued falling for them. AT&T. I was told that cancelling my cable and internet services with them would cost me $50 to not return the modem and cable box. I didn't care, as I would have had to mail them in and I didn't want to mess with the hassle, so I didn't. 6 months later, I find a $487 charge on my MasterCard, and it was from AT&T. It was $150 per piece of equipment and a $37 service charge, charging me money for their hassle of having to charge me money. I asked if I returned the equipment, would they rescind the charges, and they said yes. I returned the equipment, and they refused to take off the charge. I confirmed with them that they'd received the equipment, and they said yes they did, but wouldn't rescind the charges after all. I fought it up their chain of command as much as possible and even tried to fight it through MasterCard, but they couldn't do anything about it either. In short, AT&T screwed me out of $487 and lied to me, so F them. Neiman Marcus. I went there to buy a Prada bag for my mother. She had a knockoff and she loved it, so I figured she'd appreciate the real thing. I wear t-shirts to work, but this day it was at least a fancy one. But it didn't matter to the sales lady who told me my bag was very expensive and rolled her eyes and walked away. So I went next door to the actual Prada store and bought one there. I don't need to be judged by an angry middle-aged woman working retail, thank you very much. Comcast. F Comcast. They failed to turn off my service when I changed addresses, billed me for 2 more months, sent me to collections, and then hounded me for 3 years. I could sue, but it's not worth the stress. Additional info, I called them about this more than a dozen times and every time escalated the situation. They have dozens of tapes of us, albeit in a few of them I'm absolutely freaking out about the whole thing on the phone. My best experience was when I called their corporate office directly, but even then it was a crap show and like a week before anything happened, and I was still being hounded by collection companies somehow. Never again. Wayfair. They delivered a wooden table that had a huge split on the side and was broken where you put the leaf in to extend the table. Got 4 redeliveries, and every single time it was the exact same table with the exact same damage. Eventually, I got a full refund, but did they seriously think that would work? It makes 0 sense to me. As a bonus, I ordered a bedroom set around the same time and paid for delivery and assembly. The, quote, assemblers were 2/3 through the assembly and told me they couldn't finish because they couldn't understand the instructions. So I had them take all the stuff back and also got a refund. TurboTax. I did my return, got a notice that my e-file needed to be corrected, logged back in to fix it, and my return just wasn't there anymore. 6 hours on the phone with 3 tiers of tech support, each one trying exactly the same thing. Finally, they were just trying random stuff, so I tried random stuff in parallel and managed to get my return with the invoice number from paying for the service without logging in. I tried to get them to understand that this was a very bad thing that they should report to someone, and they told me they had no access to anyone technical and no way to submit bugs. This was from the company that lobbied to make it illegal for the government to offer tax filing service. I had some fairly expensive furniture delivered from Art Van before and noticed a pretty big scuff where the laminate was chipped off the side of a computer hutch. This was in the mid-90s. Anyway, they said that they'd get another from the truck, which I found really implausible, and sure enough, they were gone for 10 minutes before coming back with the exact same hutch, except they'd colored in the chipped area with a brown marker. I made some interesting phone calls after that one. A bar I went to on my 25th birthday. I got there first and I opened a tab to get my first couple of drinks before my friends showed up and started buying for me. At the end of the night, I went to get my bill, which should have been under $20. Instead, I got a single piece of paper with the total of $85. It didn't come with an itemized slip, so that was unusual. All the times I'd gone to the bar before, I got itemized receipts. All of my friends that night got itemized receipts when they closed out. I spent 20 minutes on my birthday at the bar calling out the bartender's name, asking for an itemized receipt, while he pretended he couldn't hear or see me. I went home and reached out to management and explained the story to them, including how long I'd tried to get his attention. The manager's reply was, "If you thought there was an issue with your receipt, you should have asked the bartender to explain it to you." Never again. In case anyone cares, it's Penn Social in DC. Since this seems to be coming up a lot, this is America, so not chip and pin. They won't serve you unless they first swipe your credit card. I couldn't simply leave without paying. It was going to be charged to me no matter what. My experience with disputing charges is that it's not super convenient, so I was really hoping to be able to deal with this at the bar without having to do that. I took my Beta Woods truck to a local tire shop for an alignment. They told me they couldn't align it because I had a sticky U-joint and then charged me for hours of labor because they, quote, had to take the tie rods off. I argued that because A, U-joints don't impact alignment, and B, there was about an inch of grime on the castle nuts, there's no way the tie rods came off. They bought out a manager who just made crap up about how alignments work. I'm a mechanical engineer. I think they thought they could get away with it because I'm a woman. Nope, I filed a complaint with the state and they were fined for lying about service costs. I guess we add mechanics to the list of, when you find a good one, hang on to them for dear life, trades, along with contractor, babysitter, escort, and hitman. Good to know. Chili's. I don't know how this even happens, but I was served fried chicken that was cold and literally had ice on it. To anyone reading this later on, I want you to know that Chili's PR staff has since contacted me trying to smooth things over. Yeah, right. Chili's served me frozen food and I'd rather trash them forever than be sweet-talked with a gift card. Panera. They raised prices and shrank their portions a while ago. It's not worth it anymore. Fricking AT&T. It's one thing after another with these buttholes. They've been taking $60 a month from my checking account for the last 7 months for a prepaid phone that I don't have. They can't tell me why or take me off autodraft because I don't have a phone number to look up the phone that I don't own. Just spent almost an hour at the bank trying to dispute this crap. It's just the most recent in a long line of crappery caused by AT&T. They're absolute twits. What happened when the quiet, nice guy finally raged out? My mum. We had what we now refer to as the Jerry Springer Christmas when I was 7 or so. One aunt hated her sister-in-law and just started screaming at her. Then shoving started, husbands got involved, and then it just continued to devolve from there. My mum went straight into mediator mode and tried to calm everyone down, but it wasn't working. She decided to come check on us kids and found my cousin and me holding each other and sobbing because we were scared. The next thing I hear is her scary mum voice screaming over everyone, "Listen here, you motherfrickers, my kid is crying on Christmas because her family can't keep their crap together for the one day a year that we all see each other. You're going to march your butts into that room single file and apologize to each kid individually. Then you're going to shut the frick up until I get them out of here. We're going to go find and look at lights, and this family better be the picture of goddamn Christmas joy by the time we get back." My mum had never really cussed in front of me before and had only ever used goddamn when things were really bad. That side of the family didn't celebrate Christmas for a few years after that. A colleague at work was getting chewed out by a customer about something completely irrelevant. The guy was one of the most placid humans I've ever met, but he just snapped and tore into this guy for about 10 minutes until the manager came down and took him to one side. Never saw him lose it like that again. I had a master sergeant at one of my units in the army. The guy was half asleep most of the time. I don't think I ever heard him talk more than once. One day, all of the guys got called into a large classroom and he was in there looking upset. He launched into a rant about how easy it was to go number one in the toilet instead of on the ground in front of it. The guy was passionate about where people went number one. Drew a stick figure diagram all angrily showing how you use one hand to stabilize and aim your stream into the toilet. I had to keep from laughing because he seemed like he was about to blow his lid. A mechanic I worked with was getting verbally attacked by a customer claiming he ripped him off. The guy's going off, saying all kinds of racist crap, and then stepped up like he was going to swing. Henry beat him to the punch, literally. Then he walked calmly to the back office and called the cops on himself. One of my teachers in high school was the calmest dude ever. Never yelled, never told kids off, would just laugh and smile and wait for us all to calm down and then continue with his teaching. One day we must have been getting particularly rowdy and we weren't calming down like we usually did. He couldn't get a word in edgeways. I could see him getting increasingly frustrated, and eventually he just bellowed, "Shut up!" And the entire class was shocked into silence. He never had to do it again. That's the thing about the nice people in life. Often when they do go full murder rage, it's that much more shocking because of who's doing it, not the fact that it's happening to begin with. You know, it takes a lot to make my mum yell. On the rare occasion she did yell, it still felt like she had self-control. Like she yelled on purpose because there was a reason to yell. Like she needed to be that loud for us to hear. Or one of the kids needed to learn to never run into traffic again, for example. But one morning when we were teenagers, my brother was being really difficult. And my very sweet, soft-spoken mother yelled, "God damn it, Sean!" and threw a butter knife down so hard that it stuck a 1/4 inch deep into the oak hardwood floor, against the grain. I can still hear the noise it made. You know, we were all very well behaved for the rest of that day. I did eventually ask my mum why she did that, and her explanation was that she felt too angry to hold a knife, even a butter knife, and was trying to get it out of her hand before she did something terrible. I was chilling at a friend's house as a kid. His dad was the chillest, nicest guy. And that day, my friend's mum, also super nice, was across the street talking to the neighbor about something that I can no longer recall. The neighbor was one of those guys who never respected common etiquette. Music blaring, parking his crappy boat in front of other people's houses, cars parked on the lawn. The neighbor started screaming at the mum and we all went out on the stoop to see what was happening. As soon as we got outside, the guy called my friend's mum a C-word. Well, my friend's dad heard that and went full Hulk mode. He ran, screaming across the street and just frickin' decked the guy and crouched over him shouting warnings and threats. It took a while for his wife to calm him down. I don't think any of them had ever seen him react to something that way. Maybe the dad had never seen it before either. I worked as a line cook with a chef who I became really good friends with. Really chill dude, easygoing, and actually really fun to cook with. He taught me most of what I know about cooking, and I owe him a lot for my success. Never really saw him get mad until one day we were getting slammed during a busy night, and one of the servers said something that really ticked him off. Not sure if I ever heard what it was, but the next thing I knew he sent the deep fryer basket flying at Mach 1 across the kitchen, nearly missing the dish kid and shattering a light bulb. He stormed off and 5 minutes later, after a smoke break, came back and casually continued cooking as if nothing had happened. He apologized about it the next day and we never talked about it again. The restaurant industry is a stressful place. When I was in my late teens, I was financially irresponsible and borrowed money from my grandparents to move out of my mum's house. We made a plan about how I'd pay it back in installments and I only missed 2 of the payments, and with each one I called my granddad and asked if it was okay. He was always so cool about it. But one day I got a call from him and he was livid, screaming at me on the phone and I could hear my grandmother crying in the background. He was the angriest I've ever heard anyone in my life and I was terrified. He wanted to know why I hadn't made the payment that month, but I was sure I had. Turns out I'd accidentally set the automated payment to be drawn from the wrong account and it hadn't done it. It was an honest mistake on my part and I explained that to him. I transferred the money immediately and he instantly calmed down. I later found out he had become an alcoholic after he quit smoking, and he'd talk to my grandmother like that regularly when no one was around. I used to see this woman in my building every day. Very friendly. We always checked on each other's lives. We had lunch a few times over the years. It was friendly to a certain degree. A couple of years passed. She was much older than me, and one day, riding the elevator, she told me she was saying goodbye. I said I was sorry to see her go and asked why. She said she was retiring that day. I asked if her office was throwing a party or if she was celebrated. She turned to me and her face contorted into an image of rage. She clenched her teeth and said she didn't tell anyone in her office, including her bosses. She only told HR last week. This was her last day and she was never returning to see or talk to anyone in her office again. I had a friend who was in his 60s, a functioning alcoholic, but he was the most calm and composed guy that I've ever known. He never raised his voice or swore. Everything was done with meticulous precision. He once explained to me that if you use vulgar language and shout all the time, then you'll have nowhere to go when you really do get angry. I'd worked with him for about 3 years and never heard him raise his voice or swear before. The week before, he had been shafted on his pay, and the manager promised to get it sorted by Friday. Friday rolled around and it hadn't been sorted. So when my friend walked up to the manager in the open office and declared loudly, "Where the frick is my money? You promised this would be resolved." The whole office went silent and the look of dread on the manager's face was haunting. The money was in his account by the end of the day. That was him losing his crap. My husband. For your information, he works in a very hands-on clinic and he has to be super calm and steady because he's poking needles into the joints, elbows, and knees of squeamish patients all day. I was brought into emergency because my labor wasn't progressing. I was running a fever and the baby was in distress. He knew an emergency C-section was the only way, but those 2 maternity nurses were just calmly chatting over my writhing form like it was tea time. He very calmly asked them twice to call for the anesthetist and get things going. But they knew he was always gentle and they just nodded along without moving an inch. More chatting, I was quite medicated when I witnessed the following. He slammed both palms to the side of the stretcher and said, "Is no one listening? Get the consultant in here." I was very proud of him that day. There are 3 things all wise men fear: The Sea and Storm, A Night with No Moon, and The Anger of a Gentle Man. I've also realized that this is a kind of film trope as well. The mild-mannered person flipping out and rendering everyone speechless. I mean, clearly it has a real-life basis. This isn't my story, but my dad's. Growing up, his best friend Leif was a quiet, shy guy that was a bit socially awkward. In school, he wasn't physically bullied, but this one kid teased him constantly. This would have been late 50s, early 60s, so kids were just expected to tough it out. My dad would usually confront the kid, but one day a girl runs up to him and says that Leif and the kid are fighting. My dad runs over to save Leif, but when he breaks through the circle he finds the bully flat on his back, with Leif sitting on his chest, holding him by the ears and smashing his head into the pavement over and over. My dad tackles him, wrestles him to the ground and screams at him, asking what he's doing. The thing that stayed with me from that story was how he described it. It was like there was nothing in there. I felt like I could see the back of his skull through his eyes. Luckily, they were kids, so the damage was serious but limited. The bully escaped with stitches and a concussion, and Leif had to talk to the school psychologist. My dad and Leif stayed best friends, and when I met him as an adult, he was still quiet, but less shy and awkward. Man, my grandma has a similar thing. This boy was a couple of years older than she was, and he was constantly picking on her. He's riding his bike home from school one day, and he rides past her and he's shouting at her and she knocks him right off his bike and beat the crap out of him. My sweet little granny. The neighbor saw it and said he was proud as crap that she beat the snot out of this crappy little kid. I think it was the start of my grandma's bad witch streak, because not much later she started street racing. She was allegedly a sweet little girl, but man, I think she must have had a mean streak in her. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad is the most mild-mannered person I've ever met. He's the most composed, level-headed man that I know. I once saw him trip in our garage and land in a bucket of nails and screws to realize that he'd had one lodged in his kneecap. He looked over at me and said, "Don't tell your mum, she'll overreact," while he grabbed a pair of pliers and yanked out the screw. But when something happened to my special needs brother, he'd get this sparkle in his eye that could scare a Navy SEAL. When I was 8 years old, my parents took my brother and I to eat at a restaurant, which was kind of a big deal because my brother was recently diagnosed with a degenerative physical health issue which was racking up huge medical debts, all while my dad lost his job after getting the bends on a work dive. We went to our favorite Mexican restaurant in town and parked in the handicapped spot nearest the front door. I still remember having an unusually light-hearted time in which I could see my parents' stress level subside and listened to funny stories about the past. We simply enjoyed a memorable dinner with lots of laughter. Looking back, I realized this was a big expense that my parents probably couldn't afford and sacrificed for, so that we could have a normal night as a family. When we left the restaurant, we found a car parked next to us, not in the parking spot, but in the yellow stripes immediately next to our van. Normally, this might not be an issue, but my brother was in a wheelchair and we had a folding ramp. Not the hydraulic lifts that you see today, but a heavy metal powder-coated ramp. This was a Friday night, so traffic was crazy busy and my parents didn't feel comfortable just backing up into the street to load my brother, so my dad went into the restaurant to see if the manager could find the owner of the car and ask him to move. When my dad emerged from the restaurant, I saw a look that I've never seen before. It was one of focus, determination, and rage. He looked at my mum and told her to get in the car. She just hopped in and said, okay, in a way that indicated she knew something was about to go down. He turned to me and said, "Watch this crap." He unfolded the ramp and it slammed down onto the roof of the car next to us. He then turned to explain that the manager had just told him, "I'm not responsible for what happens in the parking lot. Why don't you just figure something out?" So my father did figure something out. To be clear, there were maybe 4 or 5 groups eating in the restaurant. The manager could have easily asked someone to move. We waited for a minute and the manager came out yelling, "What are you doing? You can't do that!" This was when my dad lost it. At this point, he picked up my brother's wheelchair with him in it, which weighed about 150 to 200 pounds, and sat him on the hood of the car while yelling at the manager. He then jumped up on the hood of the car, picked up my brother to put him on the roof of the car, still giving my manager the business. He jumped up to the roof and calmly rolled my brother across the ramp from the roof of the car into our van. He told me to get in and calmly told the manager, "I figured something out." Since that day, I've never seen anything remotely close to the same level of anger from him. We laugh about the story from time to time, and my dad is always quick to say that he overreacted, but I think he reacted just fine. We do believe that the car in question was the manager's because any customer could have seen what was happening from inside the restaurant, so we don't feel too bad. My dad never had to do this again because he had some incredibly bright orange stickers made to say, "You park like a moron," that he kept on him at all times just in case someone needs to be reminded of what they are by placing it on their driver's side window. I used to do seasonal work sorting tax returns, like 500 people in a warehouse-size room sorting through returns, stacking them in boxes. Anyway, we had this one guy on my team, a huge guy, a gentle giant, really nice. Suddenly, one day he smashed the table he's working at, then flips a big box full of paperwork. It flew over my head and 20 feet away. He threw the table out of his way, then stormed out. Turns out he was getting his paycheck garnished for something or other. Well, they would have thought twice about doing that again. I have no clue whether the garnishment was deserved or not, but maybe avoiding making your Hulk-sized employee angry and looking the other way is a policy a lot of managers make a point of following. I remember having these two friends in the 5th grade who at the time I didn't think they'd thought of me as their friend, because I'd been bullied up to 4th grade, moved the summer before 5th grade, and everyone called me annoying and kept me at a distance for those 4 years. There was this one day where the one kid was being a complete jerk for no reason, literally just making fun of people, pushing others, so on and so forth. Well, for some reason, he decided that I was worthy of getting punched, so he came from behind and somehow hit me in the eye. This was at recess, mind you. Well, when I got back to class, these two tall kids, one girl and one guy, saw that I had a bruised eye and had been crying. The moment they got the chance, they came over and asked me in an angry tone, "Who hurt you?" And I remember thinking something like, oh crap, I can't let them know who hurt me, they'll kill him. So they kept asking the entire rest of the week until I finally told them, and when I did, I felt extremely guilty. These two kids had asked me for help a few times in class, we talked from time to time, and I sometimes let them have part of my lunch that I didn't want but they liked. They were the kind of kids to have never been seen getting even slightly annoyed at anyone ever, so when they kept asking me who hurt me, I felt scared for the guy that hit me, and I was right to be afraid. At recess, the day after I told them who hit me, I saw them drag the guy behind some trees which were behind the playground. No one was supposed to go there. And from there on out, I couldn't see what they did, but before recess ended, this one kid, with the other two standing behind him the whole time, apologized, and I could tell he had been crying on the way to me. I told him it was fine, and the two kids let him go. After he left, I asked them why they hurt him, and they said, "Because he hurt our friend and we'll do it again if he tries hitting you again." I did feel like crying after they said that, but held my tears in. For the rest of 5th grade and up, and all of middle school, they hovered around me, and anyone who seemed like they might want to start crap with me got chased away by my two friends. If I could find them again and express my gratitude to them, I'd do it 1,000,000 times over. They were the very first people to get angry on my behalf, ever, and stick around with me. My math teacher in middle school. He would even brag about not being angry and about how it was a useless emotion. One day, this kid ticked him off so bad, he swiped all of the kids' crap off the table in front of the whole class and kicked him out. My 5th grade teacher was a very calm and collected individual, except for one time when a kid said her mother did the deed with men for money. The teacher lost it. She was screaming about disrespect and stuff and even called her mum, put her on the speaker and asked if she was a working girl, in front of the whole class. I miss that teacher. My first semester in college, I was in a math class with a horrible teacher. The entire class hated him. The girl that sat in front of me was very sweet and soft-spoken. One day, I don't remember what set her off, but she just snapped and started screaming at him. It caused such a commotion that someone had to call security to check if everything was okay. The teacher quickly dismissed security and went back to teaching like nothing had happened. I've noticed this with people who are aware that they're the jerks when people call them out on it and lose their crap. They try to sweep it under the rug, move on as quickly as possible and pretend nothing happened. My boss does this. I'm very chill, but every once in a while he pushes me over the edge and I tell him off. He often won't respond or makes eye contact and then pretends like it never happened a few minutes later. If they acknowledge it, then they'd have to apologize and that'd hurt their pride too much. Oh, boy do I have one for this. So during my previous pre-pandemic job, I worked with a really talented, super nice manager named James, who was a total professional and very good with customers. He's one of those guys you look at and from sheer physical size you'd think he could easily be a bouncer. but he's just an absolute teddy bear of a human being. It didn't matter what changes came down from the top of the company or how business was going, the guy just soldiered on as a beacon of positivity. Never got visibly mad or upset, he was pure Teflon to bad news. But one day I got a call from a janitorial service we contracted with to do a lot of the deeper cleaning at our facility. During this call, they asked me to confirm that we have 2 day shifts and 1 overnight shift cleaning our building. I don't know why this came up exactly, but it was puzzling since we only ever had 1 day cleaning shift and 1 overnight cleaning shift, and this had been the case ever since I began working at that particular location. It had probably been a year and a half, maybe 2 years by this point. They kept insisting that I must be mistaken and that surely there was a second shift during the day that I was just missing. However, I was the guy who had to regularly review their work and submit this feedback to the contracted company, so I was 100% certain that we'd only ever had the 1 day shift. Eventually, I put them on hold and informed James of this, and like a switch, the guy completely changed his attitude. Gone was the James who always had a smile on his face and never let anything get to him. In his place arrived a stone-faced mountain of a man who asked me to let him talk to these people. I gave him the phone, he goes into his office, and I watched through the window as he becomes increasingly animated, maybe even to the point of outright yelling, as the truth comes out that we had been charged for the second daytime janitorial shift that had never actually existed. It was like watching a teddy bear turn into a grizzly in the span of 3 minutes. The guy was able to move past it and returned to his normal self after the call. But while he was on it, I could tell he was just incensed by the fact that we were being billed for services that we weren't actually receiving. Klutzes. What are the worst injuries you've sustained doing a basic task? I dislocated my knee putting socks on. I was standing near the foot of my bed and was doing a balancing act putting the socks on. When I went to put my right leg back down, my pants leg somehow got stuck on the footboard of my bed. My jeans somehow decided to rip and my knee moved in a way it was never intended to. I'm definitely a klutz and tend to find myself in weird situations like this far too often. I got out of bed a few weeks ago and turned my ankle. I tore every ligament and have to use crutches now. Laughing with a friend of mine at Dairy Queen. I laughed so hard because he pulled out a Johnny instead of money and he thought everyone saw him, so I burst into gut-wrenching laughter, apparently rupturing my L4, L5, S1 vertebrae, requiring immediate surgery. Tore my ACL and meniscus in my right knee while pulling my pants up changing in the locker room after swim practice. It took 2 surgeries and 6 months of recovery to get back to normal. Because of pants. I was sitting on a couch. There was a blanket on the floor barely covering my feet. While seated, I leaned forward to pull the blanket onto myself. I pulled a muscle in my back and was out of work for 4 days. I broke my collarbone after accidentally rolling onto the floor off a bunk bed. It was the bottom bunk. My brothers and I shared a room until I was about 9. As the youngest, I was usually assigned the top bunk. At one point, I woke up face down on the floor with a nice crusty pool of blood in the carpet about the size of my face. Sometime throughout the night, I'd fallen off the bunk and nearly broken my nose, but simultaneously knocked myself out from the impact. Rather than get a railing, my dad built a custom bunk bed with 3 bunks, like an L-shaped desk with 2 levels, and I was assigned one of the lower beds. My middle brother ended up jumping off the top bunk into the lower bunk quite often. Once he jumped too far and broke his nose on the wall. I think all of us are a bit clumsy. The narrator doesn't think that you or anyone in your family should be allowed near multi-level apparatuses again in your lives. Those things clearly don't agree with you. Hopefully nobody in your family works on scaffolding because that's a tragedy waiting to happen. I've pulled a muscle while doing the incredibly complicated task of walking and taking off a jacket. There was sudden lightning in my back, I couldn't walk for a week, had to go to physical therapy for 3 months. Turns out I wasn't using my muscles correctly for years. I had to relearn how to use my own body so that it hopefully won't happen again. Physical therapy is great, by the way, even if you aren't in pain anymore. I injured my knee by crouching to pet a cat. I could barely walk for a few days and couldn't do any exercise or sports for nearly a month. I built a nice counter for our laundry room, installed a new washing machine, installed the wall-mounted dryer, made shelves with the leftover wood, and even found time to plant an apple tree that my mum bought, all in the same day. I then slipped a disc when I was washing my hands. When I was a little kid, I fell over and broke my collarbone while sitting and eating waffles. I wish this was fake. although it was pre-broken. About a year before this incident, I'd broken the same bone playing on my mother's bed. I believed I was a Power Ranger and rolled off the bed onto the hard wooden floor. I was once concussed after being dropped off late to school, turned back to wave to my dad and ran smack straight into a stop sign and dropped cold. Little me, about 8 years old, spent a few hours gazing through his telescope at the moon, the stars, and the sky. It was awesome. When I was done, I hugged my telescope, optical tube down and eyepiece up. I was very short, very, very short, almost telescope size back then, so of course I tripped. By reflex, I looked down while at the same time the big end of the telescope hits the ground and my mouth caught the eyepiece, almost, right between the upper lip and the nose. Went almost all the way in. It turns out my face is a gusher. In 2 spots it went all the way through my face meat and hit my front teeth. Lucky me it didn't crack a tooth. Thanks for the ER trip, Mr. Telescope. Who knew stargazing was such a dangerous activity? I sneezed and threw my back out. You know all those terrible injuries you get by exercising with heavy weights in the gym if you use poor technique? Well, how about stubbing your toe on the power rack so hard that you can't walk for days? My buddy decided to use the bench after someone had pressed 3 plates per side onto the rack and then not taking them off afterwards. Not being a physics person, he unracked all 3 plates on one side, went around and began to unrack one plate, and the bar flipped up, smacked him, and dropped the other plates on his big toe. He took a 8-year break from the gym after that. Pulled a muscle in my right butt cheek while taking a nap. Couldn't walk properly for the next 7 hours. 2 years ago, I tore my meniscus and blew out my knee playing ping pong at our office Christmas party. Stepped to the left and went down hard. Worst part was 2 days later when I finally stubbornly went to the emergency room and the nurses told me that the guy in front of me, a pro athlete, had the exact same injury from a vicious hockey hit. I bowled in college. One day I ended up showing up to practice late because I slept through my alarm when I took a nap. So I was rushing to get to practice like, oh boy, I've screwed up. And at this point, I'm like 30 to 45 minutes late, and I finally got to the bowling alley, and in my infinite wisdom, I decide I'm just going to start throwing shots without easing into it because I've already missed enough practice. It wasn't a day full of good decisions, as you can tell. 2 shots in, I proceed to throw out my hip and was limping around for over a week. I not only threw out a hip at 19, I did it bowling. In short, 19-year-old turns 65 in the blink of an eye. I broke my foot stepping off a curb. There was a minor pothole, and I mean a very small dip, that I didn't notice when stepping, and my foot rolled sideways as I put all of my weight on it. Heard the pop? Didn't hurt too bad at first, so I went about my day. When I got home, I couldn't get my shoe off without unlacing it fully due to swelling. Went in the next day and, yep, broke my foot by stepping off a curb. I grabbed a manila file folder at work and got a paper cut that needed stitches. Everyone at work was kind and understanding and didn't mock me. That last sentence was sarcasm. They gave me hell. I slept on my neck wrong and tore an artery. That created a blood clot which then lodged in my brain stem, causing a massive stroke. I spent a month in the hospital and had to relearn to swallow, speak, focus my eyes, stand, walk, and a dozen other little things. Don't fall asleep watching YouTube videos, I guess. I was cutting potatoes. Couldn't figure out why I couldn't cut completely through this specific potato. It turns out my finger was in the way. It wasn't a bad injury, it didn't hurt at all, didn't need stitches, and was actually pretty funny, but there was a ton of blood, and all the other students and the teacher were freaking out. Bleeding is fun, guys. Oh my god, someone's nerves weren't doing their job. I know that temporary suspension of pain can be a thing, but you do make it sound like you were carving away wondering what that bone-hard blockage was for a few seconds before you realized. Surely you should have noticed. In college, I broke my toe tripping over my desk chair in my dorm trying to get to my alarm to turn it off in the morning. Yes, I did turn off my alarm, but then I went back to sleep for about half an hour more. It only hurt like a stubbed toe at first. When I woke up later, it hurt a lot more and was all kinds of different colors. I was 7 years old playing tag at a local children's park with a few friends. It was about 6 or 7 p.m. in the fall, getting darker by the second. I was running from the kid who was it, and because of how short I am, I ran into the plastic outside the bottom of a walkway. making a very deep and wide gash right above my right eyebrow. I blacked out for a minute or so. I came to without feeling any pain, and it didn't help that I have a very high pain tolerance. I felt something wet on my head and put my hand to it. Because it was dark out, young me saw the darker tinted substance in my hand. Thinking it was ketchup, I licked it. After about 10 seconds of processing the taste, I realized, oh, this is blood. I ran over to my dad and he, laughing his butt off, decided to take me back to our neighborhood to consult with our neighbor and good friend who was a nurse. She tells my dad to take me to the emergency room. At this point, he was laughing even harder. We went in, I got some stitches, don't remember how many, and I also got made fun of by my father. You know, 2 things have happened today that made me wonder if I'm the only one this crap happens to. The first, I burnt my eyelids after the egg I was frying flew out of the pan and smacked me in the face, and the second, my son fractured his wrist by banging into a pole while he was walking down the street. I used to skateboard about 25 to 30 kilometers a day when I lived in Amsterdam for at least 3 years straight. Never had any injuries or accidents. It's as easy and automatic as riding a bike is for the other Dutch people. I went out to skate for 2 minutes in the UK, fell and broke my collarbone right away. I blame having to ride on the other side of the road and bad luck. I stabbed myself in the butt cooking a pork chop. I was pan-frying it and had a knife in my right hand to keep checking it to see if it was cooked, by stabbing it. I'm really not a good cook. I kept said knife in my hand and the oil spat at me and I jumped and bam, stabbed myself in the butt. I also have a 4-inch scar on my inner arm from playing on the swing. But I constantly hurt myself in stupid little ways because I'm so damn clumsy. Not me personally, thank God, but someone I knew cut off their finger slicing a bagel in half. Using a handheld mixer to puree some mushrooms. Mushrooms clog the blades, I use my finger to remove the mushrooms, and without thinking, press start and cut my finger. 10 minutes later, do the same thing with my other hand. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not me, but my husband. He brushes his teeth very hard and fast. One day, he somehow hit his teeth and broke the toothbrush in half, then stabbed himself in the cheek. After 2 hours of trying to get the bleeding to stop, I bought some butterfly sutures to close the wound. Unfortunately, he did the same thing again a week later. He blames me for buying cheap toothbrushes. I broke my ankle while walking down the street in a foreign country. Slipped on a wet drain cover on the sidewalk. Surgery that night, 2 weeks in hospital, then managing the rest of the study abroad program on crutches. Years later, I now have major arthritis in the broken joint, which is more and more significantly limiting my mobility. As a bonus, I managed to break my toe by stubbing it while walking across my bedroom the day after I got back from a trip to a different foreign country. All my friends assumed that I'd injured myself abroad again. In short, walking normally leads to broken bones. My wife worked out during the first 8 months of her pregnancy, modified as necessary as our son was growing in her. She set a personal record of a 200-pound deadlift at the 8-month mark. She was scolded as that wasn't the time for PRs, but it was impressive nonetheless. Then she threw out her back bending over to pick up laundry on the floor. I fractured my wrist falling off a couch. I pulled a muscle in my hand while wiping my butt once. I also damaged my vocal cords because I held in a sneeze. I stepped on my finger and broke it when I was tying my shoe once. I got hurt by a screen door. I was taking my dog outside to use the bathroom early one morning, and Snoopy decided he had to go real bad and started flying down the stairs off the back porch. He was on a leash, and I didn't want to hurt him and make him fall down the stairs, so I rushed out behind him. I was wearing a pair of wool socks and slippers, and as I awkwardly started following him, the bottom corner of the screen door clipped me on the heel. It hurt a bit and I just limped around as he did business. When I got back inside, I decided to take my sock off because it was uncomfortably hurting, and I saw there was a good amount of blood that had seeped through the sock. I pulled it off and saw that I had a pretty big gash across the back of my ankle. A frickin' screen door did that to me, all because of crappy timing. I broke my 2 smallest toes and the growth plate in my foot. You ever seen those giant plastic bins for wrapping paper? It was Christmas and I had the lid to one of those. I had my small dog in the lid and was pushing her up and down the hallway carpet on my hands and knees. Well, we had those old metal spring door stoppers and one of them no longer had the cap on it. I stubbed my toe on it and the spring hooked end went into my foot, wrapped around the bone, twisted my two toes upside down. Imagine my surprise when I looked down after thinking I'd simply stubbed my toe. I'm currently dealing with some sort of elbow and arm tendinitis from presumably using a stress ball too much. As a bonus, I was only using it to re-strengthen 2 other injuries. Oh my god, so we can wreck ourselves even just doing physio to recover from other issues? My god, we are a versatile species, aren't we? I broke my wrist shooting a basketball. I don't even know how it happened. I was in middle school and went up for a shot, then came down and was crying in pain. But yeah, I didn't make basketball tryouts. Feels bad, man. I punched myself in the mouth and chipped a tooth. I was putting on a bra. I gave myself a black eye the same way. I was so stunned it took me about 5 minutes to figure out what happened. My mum broke her foot stepping out of the front door. The step is about 4 inches. She was in her 30s, she'd lived in the house for years and used the step every day without incident. She doesn't have osteoporosis or any other bone problem. She didn't fall, she just put her foot down slightly off-center and it snapped one of her metatarsals. I was lying in bed and threw my back out. Damn, I couldn't breathe straight for over an hour before I managed to roll over to another position that I hoped was more comfortable. It was not. Big mistake. I also managed to get a concussion in my sleep when a lamp fell on my head. And if you don't count sleep as an activity, how about walking? I took some weird step and broke my little toe. You can't really go more mundane than walking, can you? I can have several pans and pots on different burners on the stove and handle a chef's knife pretty well. The worst burn I ever got was from the microwave, and I cut myself with a toaster while putting it away. My dad stabbed through his palm so hard with a knife while getting avocado pits out of avocados that he had a bruise on the back of his hand from where the tip almost went all the way through. He yelled out, "Frick a duck!" when it happened, pulled the knife out and instinctively jerked his hand to numb the pain, kind of, and created a Jackson Pollock painting of his blood all over the kitchen ceiling. Snowboarding. I spent the whole day at the terrain park, got a 360 down pretty well and was working my way up to hopping onto rails, building a lot of confidence before it was time to go. I only got to go snowboarding about 3 times a year maximum, so it was a big step for me and I was feeling really good about my day there. Then my little sister asked me to go down the bunny hill, which is where beginners and people who've never skied before go to learn. It's a gentle hill that hardly ever gets fast. I rode down it with my sister skiing beside me. Upon trying to stop at the bottom at a very low speed, I caught my edge and flipped, scorpioned myself so badly that my board blade actually sliced the back of my head and neck connection, and I bled a lot. A scorpion is when you fall onto your stomach and your heels still carry over, making a scorpion shape. In this case, my heels and snowboard were like a scorpion stinger. I was flat on my face in the snow, like the scorpion's belly. My scorpion stinger of a snowboard carried far enough to slice the back of my neck. I still use my blood-stained ski coat. I felt defeated, despite the skills I'd built up that day. I jumped through a set of aluminium double doors in the back of a grocery store to flirt with the cashier I'd crushed on as a bag boy. I'd grown a lot recently. The top of my head hit the cement top of the doorframe. It scalped me a bit, and I flipped and landed on my head on the hard, cold tile floor. The pool of blood surrounded me rapidly. I had to be taken to the hospital to get 22 stitches to reattach my scalp. I got the afternoon off work though, and 2 weeks later I lost my virginity to that cashier. Worth it! I fell off a playground slide as a kid and I have a 3-inch scar at my eye to show for it. If my father-in-law was on the internet, he'd say the time he threw his back out when my infant daughter tooted on his lap. I'd just pulled a pizza out of the oven and was about to devour it along with a 6-pack of beer, as you do. When I opened my fridge to get the beer, the bottom of the door caught my big toenail and separated it from my skin all the way to the base. The nail ended up falling off and it took a full year to grow back. I've thrown my back out taking a dump before. Sometimes a crap is so serious you need a spotter to hold your hand. I mean, depending on what you ate that day, it could be a pretty serious change in weight distribution on your body when you stand up. There's probably a ridiculously high number of people who've injured themselves getting off the toilet, and I'm not joking. Throwing your back out during delivery is probably a bit rarer though. Oh, I've got a couple. The first was my lung collapsing from just being alive and being tall. This happens a lot. It's called a spontaneous pneumothorax, happens to tall, thin people. I was in line on Black Friday getting bubble tea. I thought it was a heartburn, slept it off, got worse, went to the ER next day, 3 weeks in hospital. I also broke my humerus at a soccer tournament. No idea how I broke it, I just woke up one day and my shoulder hurt, so I thought it was a cramp or a tight muscle. I proceeded to finish out the tournament, stretch, pull, and spin my shoulder around trying to get it to feel better. Yeah, all the stretching and moving made it worse, but hey, we won the tournament. Breaking a stick for firewood. It was about the thickness of a nickel. I was breaking it how I always break sticks that size, thumbs out and push through the middle, super simple and effective. Well, apparently my thumb had popped out when I started this process and I hadn't noticed. I continued through the stick breaking process until I felt my thumb go the wrong way. Dropped the stick and realized what had just happened. This was at summer camp, so I had a brace that kept my thumb in the thumbs up position all summer. I did that all the time and in all photos. So much so that it became natural for me to pose thumbs up in photos. Oh, I have two. I leaned in to get a final clinging sock out of the drying machine and threw my back out for 2 weeks. The fact that my body weight caused it is what led to the next injury, which is through a diet, 1,000 varied calories a day, and exercise, at least 6 nights a week jogging for as much as 8 miles on a treadmill, I managed to lose 65 pounds in 5 months. This murder-faced my gallbladder with gallstones and required surgery. I remember laying in the emergency room in a different state when the surgeon explained that my rapid weight loss caused my gallbladder to get backed up with stones, processing all of that fat through. I exclaimed, "But I did exactly what you guys told me to do." I threw my back out while going number 2 at work. I came in to tell everyone I'd thrown my back out, but because my voice was struggling from the pain, they thought I was tearing up from our coworker having died just the day before. So one of them came over and gave me a hug mid-sentence, which just made things worse. Reached for the remote while lying on the couch and tweaked something in my back. It hurt for 2 weeks easily. I was low-key scared that I had some kind of cancer. No muscle should be hurt that easily. What's the craziest secret drama that went down at a university? Professors were purchasing tricked-out laptops with their budgets shortly before leaving the university. The university in turn would let the professors purchase the hardware for a song because it was used. We're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 euro machines being purchased 6 months down the line for 500 euros. Someone finally caught on to this scheme and now nobody can purchase the used hardware. I work for a prominent university in Japan. My Japanese colleagues tend to follow the rules very strictly and blindly follow manuals. One day, an American professor had to rush to the US to see his dying mother. The staff members of class operations called him as he was grieving, asking him to still teach classes and review reports. Obviously, the lack of empathy and inflexibility led the professor to take his bags and work for another school. Students never knew the true reason why he stopped teaching. My teacher was Syrian. He was practically always at university, always tired, and always acting off. He'd sleep in his office, forget to hand back assignments, mix up basic things, cry randomly in the hallway. We later found out his family was being held hostage back home while he was teaching in Canada. The two parts that break my heart are that students used to hate him. I always liked him as a person, and as a teacher he was competent. He was just always late for everything and would mix up grades. I'd be annoyed, but sitting in his office and going through stuff, he'd always correct mistakes and was fair with his grading. He gave good feedback. When I found out the circumstances, it made me sad, because he isolated himself on the emotional side. If you wanted help, he was always there at your beck and call. If you wanted a meeting, he was there. I just wish we, as students, could have shown a bit more compassion. The second part that kills me is that we lost track of him. He took time off university. I've never seen or heard from him again. We never heard of the resolution, if any, he found. Wherever you are, Professor, I wish you the best. Our night shift janitor made some really good moonshine. Some of the professors and grad students would leave cash in our top desk drawers when we left work, and the next day a mason jar of handmade shine would be waiting there. He's since moved on from that department, but he was good people. There was some real potential for being made when an unsuspecting person left some money in their drawers for their own purposes without knowing about the system. I'm glad our sneaky shiner got away scot-free. A former health sciences lecturer and her husband were arrested for keeping a Polish immigrant to the UK as a slave, locked up in their garden shed for 4 years, making him do renovations on their house. I'm a research fellow at the University of Exeter. We recently had all of our office bins removed as part of a new policy to try and improve recycling. Got lots of mass emails replying with tons of sass and annoyance. One professor just replied, "What next? Do you expect us to drive to the local skip?" To be honest, I just thought it was really annoying not having a bin in our shared office. The worst part is, now everyone brings their own plastic bags to use as temporary bins for the day, and then we end up having tons of people trying to get them into one bin that's shared by the floor. I worked for the maintenance department one summer while in college and got exposed to a lot of the drama in that department. The highlights included the school deciding that they didn't want to deal with the union anymore, so they started hiring for all the non-teaching positions as temps and then firing them after 6 months and rehiring them 30 days later. This was done because temps didn't have to be union, and also because once a large enough percentage of employees were non-union, they could start hiring non-union employees on a permanent basis. Also, the entire third-shift cleaning crew, except the team lead, was made up of people with disciplinary issues. This included a man who had been caught multiple times stealing underwear and setting up cameras in the girls' showers. He was a gross old prevert. None of this was ever told to the students, by the way. The head of facilities and planning knew this was an issue and just did checks on all the bathrooms in the building that this guy cleaned once or twice a month. I worked at a large university, and right before I started, the long-time dean of the school went on sabbatical. I didn't think anything of it until 2 months later when I found out that the university forced him to take time off because he blew almost all of the school's budget on fancy dinners with donors. We're talking like more than $1,000 on alcohol-heavy meals. He showed up to official university events high off white snow and kept a second admin assistant as essentially his indentured mistress. He had a private bathroom with a shower installed in his office. He sent the school into a major budget crisis and was a PR disaster waiting to happen. It was a huge mess. The acting dean who stepped in got a lot of crap for how much damage control she had to do. Ultimately, this guy returned a few years later just as a part-time faculty member. But still, totally wild. One of our male English professors was being stalked by a female student to the point he had to get a restraining order against her. The only reason my class knew was because she saw him in the hallway, entered our classroom, and made a huge scene the first day of class, and security had to be called to make her leave. After that, the door was always locked for that class, and whoever was in the back row were scouters to let in late students. He also had to cancel class to go to court for the situation at least once. In the English department, one of the professors got arrested for domestic attacks, divorced his wife, then got another English professor pregnant and eventually married her. To clarify, the husband and the original wife were both professors. He had an affair with another English professor. The wife found out and there was a major fight, the cops were called, he was arrested for DV, but I believe the charges were dropped. He filed for divorce, moved in with the other professor, got her preggers, and then he and the ex were still fighting over child support and alimony. When I left, they all saw each other regularly at department meetings. It was super awkward. I was the pregnant professor's teacher assistant, but I was definitely team original wife. 2 professors arrested for running a crystal lab, one for unaliving his wife with lab supplies, and another one stepping down quietly for embezzlement. And that's how we replaced half of our chemistry department in a year. I'm noticing a trend between chemistry and murder in this. We're insane. I saw an email a few weeks ago that a graduate student out west was trying to poison his roommate with thallium. We found a bunch of unmarked jars of cyanide while cleaning out the chemistry closet one semester. They were stashed way in the back, just jars with zero notation. Someone grabbed them, not even sure why they touched them because you never just grab something unmarked in a chemistry closet, and he was carrying one too many and dropped one on the ground. A few people nearby started throwing up. The chemistry professor immediately screamed for everyone to get out and forced them to the eye wash station and had them all take their outer clothing layers off. She was across the room but had a really good nose and smelled the cyanide immediately. So that was fun. Not sure who'd been stocking unmarked cyanide or why, but someone had quite a hidden stash. Whew, boy. Apparently the chemistry department of any given institution is just one bad day away from going on a rampage and burning it all down, whether accidentally or with forethought. You've been warned, university staff and students. Grades came out. This was back in the day when they were printed. The burster, the device that cut the grade cards up into a mailable format, had torn a belt. We could not in any way get a replacement belt from the manufacturer, so we measured how long the belt needed to be. Then we went to an auto parts store and looked at a lot of belts before we settled on one and bought it. It fit the burster, and we all had the grade cards mailed that night. This is so much more wholesome than the others, which are like, after the dust settled, 2 were dead, the widow was pregnant, and all who remained had restraining orders. We fixed a mechanical problem. What a humdinger. We busted out the good rice crackers that night, I tell you. When I was going through my PhD program, a buddy of mine had his professor die on him. Young guy in his 40s, got hit by a car, boom. The not-so-fun fact was when a professor dies, their grants go away. If a grad student is on the verge of finishing, like just writing up their results, they can sometimes hop to another lab and get by. My friend, however, was only in his 2nd year. He had to start over with a new project in a new lab. Essentially lost 2 years of his life on a project that yielded absolutely nothing. Woo! Grad school. So uplifting. In our chemistry department a few years back, a grad student who was failing started poisoning another grad student they worked with closely by putting carcinogens in their food and drinks. Colorless, odorless, flavorless, thanks to his chemistry knowledge. He was eventually caught, and I'm not sure what happened to him. Thrown out for sure, perhaps arrested. Another year, a grad student pushed another student down a flight of steps to try to kill them. Chemists are crazy. A prominent professor was sleeping with his students. Actually, he met his wife that way and then had a huge issue with dating other students after getting married. Lawsuits were threatened, he resigned and moved 3,000 miles away very quickly. No news, no public info released. It was all just known through the grapevine of staff. One of the biology professors allegedly did this too while he was married. Eventually got one of the grad students pregnant and ended up leaving his wife and kids to marry the grad student. That somehow absolved him of any misconduct because they were in a legal relationship, instead of being in a teacher-student type dynamic. Other than feeling bad for the professor's old family, I felt particularly bad for the grad student's fiancé, who had given up everything and moved halfway across the country to be with her in the first place. He ended up, understandably, getting depressed and ended up taking a leave of absence from his own studies before supposedly moving home. Our heads of department or course directors would purposely keep dragging students, dragging is the act of pulling a student through their studies, even though the students would fail most classes. They'd purposely grade the student just above a pass even though the content of work was astonishingly bad, because if they left or dropped out it'd look bad on course stats and dropout rate, not to mention the university not getting the student loan money. From there, of course, statistics would be ridiculously high for that particular degree, so they'd then sell this to prospective students and parents. This is currently still going on. Oh, my source, you ask? I'm a lecturer at a university, and yes, it disgusts me. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A professor was hired to start a research center, got paid a lot of money and came in with tenure. He was frickin' weird to begin with, but as time went on it became apparent that he wasted all the funds intended for starting the center because nothing was happening but the accounts were diminishing. The whistleblower hotline was provided with a bunch of data that strongly suggested he was funneling a lot of the cash to a company owned in part by his brother, in addition to a lot of blatant and casual misuse of funds, like buying personal and convenience stuff for himself and the staff. Things started heating up and they called him for a hearing about it. The very next day we found an indignant letter announcing his resignation and accusing the entire department and college of unethical behavior slipped under the door. He skipped out in the middle of the night, leaving a big pile of deliberately damaged equipment in his office. The university didn't pursue him. I believe it was because they were in the middle of a scandal involving faculty and students in another department and just didn't want to hear about it. Students were completely unaware. I think anyone who's worked in a university can tell you about the normal infighting between factions, character assassination carried out in formal language at review, promotion, tenure committee meetings, grad student poaching, running crying to the dean, among many other things. It used to be said of politics on the university campus that it was the worst of all kinds of politics because the stakes were so small. Quote from Charles Frankel. Oh, and I work at a state university, he's absolutely right. Yeah, as someone with half a master's degree who dropped out, I can tell you that even with my limited insight, there is nobody pettier than higher-level students and faculty. My goodness, it gets vicious in universities. My professor for grad school had his lab raided by the FBI. This happened long before I joined. Apparently, one of his first or second class of grad students in the 80s or 90s decided that they wanted to use lab resources to brew some crystal. Very easy to do with the equipment we have. From what I'm told, this student would stay late in the lab after others had left to get this done. In Breaking Bad style, he fences his substances to some distributor and thought that was the end of it. The purity of his substances was enough that they were able to trace it back from the streets to him and the lab. A sting operation shut down the lab while the dust settled, and my professor was cleared of all wrongdoing since none of this was under his direct control, and all campus resources were being misused by the student. The State Intelligence Bureau told the professor that it was the largest and purest operation they'd seen in the state at this time. I think students would be surprised just how much drama happens. I'm talking everything from major drama like lawsuits that universities have kept quiet, or EO complaints to colleagues whining at each other because one thought the other rolled her eyes at the other one. I just went to a faculty meeting that was so tense and angry that I legitimately wanted to leave the room, and it was over a small wording difference of opinion in a policy that literally doesn't matter, because it's departmental and not university-wide, so it's going to get struck down anyway. Anyway, sometimes I'm happy to go to class or meet students in my office because that's the fun part of the job, and it's usually drama-free until the last week of classes when everyone starts hustling for a higher grade. At my university, it's currently that the head of one of our research institutes and a few of his colleagues somehow awarded themselves about $1 million US each as a bonus. In my country, it takes about 70 years of working on average salary to get that money. Also, the same professor possibly forged some data in paper 10 years ago. Who knows how it's going to end, but I'm sure more dirt is being pulled on other people as well. I work at a college in the Midwest. A few years ago, our president very quickly resigned. It turns out his son was growing green herb in their basement and was selling out of their house. Whether the president knew or not is still being debated, but he resigned. Two professors in my department had been best of friends for over a decade and had a huge personal falling out. They couldn't even be in the same room together, which made the department meetings awkward or impossible. Both of them started recruiting allies at the department and basically split it down the middle. It got so bad that a committee of faculty from other departments was convened to interview every faculty member and decide the fate of the entire department. One of the proposed options was shutting down the entire major. I had tenure at the time, but tenure doesn't protect you if your department no longer exists. There is a loophole in the rules that states that if you have tenure and your department dissolves, you can keep your job if another department will absorb you. I met with 3 other departments and all 3 agreed to absorb me if I was cut loose. I was the debate coach, so the departments were willing to absorb me to keep the debate team running. Most of my colleagues didn't have that leverage. Once 90% of the faculty realized the possibility of joblessness, everyone decided to play nice. Finally. I had an advanced calculus teacher who'd come into class out of his mind on green herb. He'd write down equations on the board from a book, and about 15 to 20 minutes in, he'd invariably excuse himself and take a bathroom break. He'd then return, having clearly taken a drag of white snow, and proceed to solve all equations in less than 5 minutes, and non-stop monologued about the topic for another 5, then dismissed the class and stormed out, invariably if you actually understood or not. Most students seemed physically stunned and dazed by the whole process. I don't know whether he was a frickin' genius or a deranged substance fiend, but I studied in a big university at the time, and recently I heard he was made head teacher of the math department. So I don't know what to think. I've had professors both in undergrad and grad school that would regularly get high during class. Not before, but during. Undergrad professor was a journalism professor, and pretty chill among a department of hard-drinking, old-school J. Jonah Jameson types. Except the class was a disorganized mess, and I don't think I actually learned anything. I was also a senior and didn't care. He had an odd habit of using brand names to refer to things, the way that you'd say Band-Aid or Kleenex, in ways that you wouldn't normally, and mispronouncing them. Put the memory card into the voice recorder thus became, pop your scan disk into the TAD scan. Grad professor was clearly going through some tough crap outside of class. I'd had him for a different class the year before, and he was normal then. It was a 4-hour design class with a lot of hands-on instruction, and then he'd come in half an hour late, do some one-on-one talks, then announce conspicuously, "I'm going to the bathroom," and leave for another half hour. Come back, and he'd sit in the corner playing Donna Summer on his laptop for the rest of the class. I think professors seem like a bunch of people that probably have an above-average concentration of functioning addicts in their rank, mostly alcoholics. And they're eccentric to begin with, so while this is surprisingly upfront of the guy, it's not surprising otherwise. A few years ago, an adjunct lecturer found out his contract wasn't being renewed. He went wee-wee in the corner of his office before turning in his keys. It took a lot of time and a lot of cleaning, along with a new carpet, to get rid of that smell. I was a professional assistant to the Italian department, and one of my favorite professors did a showing of a very famous Italian film, Swept Away, on the weekend. This was an outside-of-class activity, which no one was required to attend, at a college with college-age students. We don't have time to watch this in class, so we'll watch it over the weekend in the auditorium. The movie in question would be considered controversial by American standards. By Italian film standards, it's also controversial, but considered a pretty important film for anyone studying film. It deals with some pretty intense issues involving dynamics between men and women, wealthy and poor, as well as, depending on your interpretation, a unspeakable act scene. I was working in the department when we did this movie showing, so I got a front-row view of it blowing up. Apparently some freshmen, who were 18 years old, attended the screening and complained to their parents, who then complained to the school in turn. The school decided the best option was to fire my professor. The Italian department went to bat for him, reminding the school that adult students attended that screening voluntarily. The school knew they couldn't get away with firing him specifically for that, so at the end of the quarter they revoked his contract renewal. He was supposed to come back the next year. They did this for lifestyle choices that conflict with university standards. Dumb move. I don't know who on the university's legal team wrote it that way, but they should be fired. The professor in question was Pakistani and openly gay, living with his husband. As far as I understand it, he took their butts to court for discriminatory dismissal. They settled out of court for an unknown sum, but it was enough that my professor and his husband moved to Italy, where he now works at a university there and is very happy. No one outside of the Italian department knew what happened. Professor was there one quarter and gone the next, with no warning whatsoever. I used to be a custodian at a prominent university, and one of the teacher assistants in the art department would routinely leave her studio a pigsty and then assured her students, "Not to sweat the mess, we're just giving the janitor something to do." A number of students complained about her sense of entitlement, and she was rejected for a professorship for calling me a janitor instead of the proper nomenclature, custodian. Grad students are treated like trash. We're cheap labor, so the tenured professors can keep publishing without doing anything, and the professors looking for tenure can get the publications they need. Basically, the entire publish or perish culture in academia is really toxic. Unless you get lucky with a nice advisor, you're screwed. Also, university administration cares nothing for graduate students. At my school, our president announced a cash appreciation gift to every staff person making under a certain amount. Every graduate student on campus thought that included them as well, because according to every logical person, we're staff eligible for benefits and we work full-time. Nope, we're only students when it's convenient for the university and makes their numbers look good, and we're considered staff only because we're getting paid barely above the poverty line. At least I get health insurance, I guess? Oh, and my source, grad student who was once all bright-eyed and excited about academia, but it's a toxic place. Apparently, there were quite a few rich kids who didn't study, go to class, contribute, or maintain a GPA above a 3.0, whose parents shockingly paid for them to get into those schools. Say it isn't so. Academia sometimes draws ridiculous people. I had a dean once who caused so much turmoil so often by simply denying objective reality when it didn't suit her. I remember spearheading a project to repurpose a section of our building. I got the plans and she refused to believe the blueprints on square footage. So I measured it myself. She pretended it wasn't the case, that it wasn't large enough to accommodate its new purpose, but according to her, it was because in her mind it was 30% larger. I went over her head and ended up in meetings with higher administration trying to get them to understand. They all took her side. She proceeded to make my life hell for the remainder of my time at the university. It's often speculated or rumored that university professors are sometimes attracted to their students. But it can work the other way, as was the case with me when I was teaching music history. One female student sat as close as she could get, followed me around, and was always doing extra things to win favor, to the point where it became obvious to her peers. Rather than embarrass this student by discussing it with her directly, or fellow staff members and the dean, I patiently wound her down gradually over time until she eventually got the idea that nothing would come of it. When did you see someone lose big and go nuts at a casino? I work in IT for a casino, and I just had to replace a phone that was ripped off the wall and thrown at one of our pit bosses over a bad loss. I've been a dealer for 10 years. Third day of dealing, fresh out of dealer school, I'm dealing Pai Gao tiles. This is like an Asian domino game. You try to get pairs and tiles to add up as close to 9 as possible, on a $25 minimum game. A guy is there consistently betting between 25 and 75 for a good 2 hours. He then slides his whole stack on one hand for $3,000. For those of you who know the game, he gets Tin Dai Bo. I pull Jijun. For those who don't know the game, it's like he got pocket kings and I got pocket aces. Or that he pulled a 20 in blackjack and I just pulled 11 cards to make 21. The odds are astronomical, and it's the only hand that could beat him. He slams his fist on the table, swearing in Chinese, chips are flying everywhere, and he begins to shove his finger down his throat. He blows big chunks all over my game. I close the table and pit down for cleanup. That's my third day on the job. The money and benefits are great though. I highly recommend the industry. I made between $30 and $40 an hour. A gentleman at a poker table in the 5-seat game unzipped his pants and relieved his bladder on the dealer. I never caught the signal the dealer used, but it was effective, as all the guys who normally collect boxes from the tables show up out of nowhere and removed him from the table like they were taking out the trash, which I think they were. The table broke up so they could clean, the dealer showered and put on a new uniform, and I saw her on the floor again a few hours later. Table games dealer here. I work at a casino in New Zealand. Had a Thai woman a few months ago betting $300K every hand. She lost $12 million at my table in less than an hour. The casino then paid for her private charter jet to Melbourne and back, which was $70K, just so that she could get more money. I'm not exactly sure why she had to go to Melbourne to get more money, but I was doing a 16-hour shift, and she came back to my table after her trip and dropped another 15 mil. Haven't had anyone close to spending that much money ever again. She'd also flash herself at dealers for luck and requested only young white dealers. Almost all baccarat dealers at my casino are Asian, so I had to deal with her every night for 10 days. Wait, so she spent at least $27 million at your table then? All of her weirdness and racism aside, what the actual hell? I know that running casinos is generally regarded as a ridiculously lucrative, albeit gross and depressing way to make money, but as a guy who's lived in New Zealand, that one woman alone had to constitute a majority of that place's earnings for a few years. There aren't big fancy casinos over there apart from maybe in Auckland. Bloody Jaffers. Also a warning that from this point on, there's a couple of stories sprinkled throughout about people who decide they don't want to be alive anymore after losing big. So that's a heads up. A guy drove off the parking deck just to end things after he lost at the casino I worked for. Former table dealer here. I've had drunk guys tell me I'm the worst dealer ever, that I suck. I'd just reply, have a nice day. The other people at the table were generally on my side. I've higher rollers slam the table with their fists or not react at all to losing thousands. The worst and saddest one that sticks in my mind is a guy who was around $2K down on blackjack. This guy was nice. He was tipping pretty well. I was rooting for him, as I tended to do. I knocked his 10s for good luck. Then he lost a big one and just yelled, "Frick!" so loud that the entire casino must have heard. It was the kind of desperation in his voice and everything about him that told me he couldn't afford to lose as much as he just lost. He went to the ATM and I rotated to another table. It was crap like that, the gosh darn smoke in my face, the sleep deprivation from the late nights that led me to get out of there. A lot of other unpleasant moments too, but they all blur together. Money was nice, but it wasn't for me. I was a waitress in a casino establishment 10 years ago. Self-deletions weren't common there, but they did happen. The saddest was a woman who threw up a rope and finished her evening strung up in the toilets. She had lost $20K or so from memory and was not a high roller type. 3 to 4 days later, her car was to be towed from the underground park. Sadly, she'd left her 2 fluffy dogs in there and nobody knew. The poor things were also dead. The establishment then put on parking patrol officers who check cars every few hours. They'd find live dogs and kids in there far too often. I quit after 6 months as I was tired of watching miserable zombies. My girlfriend's grandfather won it big one night and then was followed home by 4 people and killed for the money. So that's the worst way I've seen someone handle a win. The people that did it still write to her father asking for help with parole or whatever apparently. Worked as a security guard on a night shift. The biggest losers are in a fantasy land where they don't even notice. Never actually saw addicts get worried about their futures. I worked in banking for a bit, and being able to see people's accounts who are gamblers backs up this statement. They don't go in and get out, say, $500 on an ATM and then lose it, get upset and go home. They get 100, then 80, then 140. On my end, I'd see the transactions with the $3 fee attached all on the same night, within minutes of each other sometimes. It seems like sometimes they're in a trance and they probably have almost no idea how much money they've actually lost. One guy was so angry at his losses that he took 200 quarters, cut them in half, taped one side, and proceeded to put them in various slot machines. Once they entered the machine, it would jam up. I actually did work in a casino in Las Vegas a few years back, in VIP services. One of our high rollers who visited frequently had a very bad gambling problem that his wife was divorcing him over. He lost everything at the tables and couldn't even afford his plane ticket back home. He threatened to go to the roof of the hotel and throw himself off. The casino felt sorry for him. We ended up buying him a ticket back home. Never heard from him again after that. Yes, it did actually happen. It was a brand new casino, so I'm sure they didn't want to risk just ignoring his threats. Also, no one made him gamble. Vegas was not built on winners. I used to be a casino host on cruise ship casinos. I've seen people lose their crap a lot, but there's one woman I'll never forget. She was gambling so much. Towards the end of the cruise, I'd find her on the slots. She'd be crying and playing. I asked her what's wrong, and she said, "I can't afford to play anymore. This is all on my credit card." She was talking, playing, and crying at the same time. I banned her from the casino, but it was already too late. I also heard stories from colleagues that used to work for an Asian cruise company that they'd always keep one lifeboat half lowered because people would jump overboard after losing all their money. I worked in the cage before becoming a dealer. The saddest thing I used to commonly see was people getting cash advances of $15 and paying a $7.99 fee to do it. It was $7.99 to get up to $100 from the machine, with $15 being the minimum withdrawal. So they were paying a 50% fee to waste $15. I guess they thought that big jackpot was right around the corner. So sad. Desperation and an addictive personality are a truly terrible combination to have going on. Folks, if you're on your last $100, please, for the love of God, if you need something to fill your empty hours, buy a cheap addictive video game and do that in the evenings instead. It lasts a lot longer for your money. I was security at a casino for a few years. The saddest story for me was this older gentleman, let's call him Tom for privacy's sake. Tom would frequent the casino every day, spending anywhere from $200 to $300. I struck up a lot of conversations with him because he was a regular and he was a genuinely kind person who I enjoyed seeing. One day, Tom comes in and I can tell he's upset. I don't make anything of it, but after seeing the guy for a few years almost every day, that day he looked really off. So a couple of hours go by and I track him down and I ask, "How's the day going? Any big wins?" Just general chit-chat. He starts sobbing, tears running down his face. His wife had passed from sudden cardiac death, is what I believe he called it, the night before, and he was devastated. We talked for quite a while. I tried comforting him while he played the machines. I'd noticed he was betting extremely large, like $200 to $300 per spin on the slot machine. I knew that was a lot for him, but I didn't say anything because it's not my business, and I was sure it was a coping mechanism for him at the moment, doing something that he loved when he just lost the love of his life. Hours later, I saw him heading out the door. I ran up to catch up to him, caught him and wished him all the best and said, "See you soon." He smiled, said thanks for the chat and thank you for the condolences and left. He booked a room in our hotel and self-deleted that night. A little while later, I found out through some other staff who were sort of friends with his family that he'd spent all of his money, every dime that evening, spinning high limit on the machines. I'm assuming just because he wanted a little enjoyment before he finished things up. It still makes me upset that I didn't invite him over or do anything else because I knew he was in pain. Haven't been in the gaming biz since the 1990s, but I've seen everything from tantrums on the floor to attacks on workers. The worst one, though, was some moron right out of prison with his homies who lost his money on the blackjack table, took it personally, went out to his car, waited for the dealer to get off work, followed him, and then beat the living crap out of him when he stopped for gas. Well, we had a guy jump from his suite on the 18th floor. We still have the divots in the pavement where his leg bones drove into the asphalt. My friend just started at the new Catskill Resort Worldwide Casino and has already said 2 people have been kicked out for doing the deed on the casino floor. One guy got undressed in the bathroom and started washing his clothes. That place has been open for 2 weeks. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked casino EMS and security. Horsemen decide that they don't want to be alive in our venues all the time. They're alcoholics, so at least one drinks themselves to the hospital every year, and they like to knife each other too. Someone drove a car into the casino wall, not the doors, the wall. The driver had a traumatic brain injury and luckily didn't injure anyone else. Someone else left the casino drunk and on a bunch of substances, drove through someone's house and ended them. There was another self-deletion by a shotty in the parking lot. Someone else punched a machine and broke the giant touchscreen. That was $5,000 to replace, and that made them a felon. People are constantly taking too many substances in the bathrooms, like a lot, and others get so desperate that they'll wander up and down the aisles looking for pennies left on the machines. We had a guy jump off the parking garage. We had another shoot his wife's lover in the garage and kill him before turning the weapon over on himself. Not a casino employee, but the other day my father-in-law, who's security, watched an elderly lady lose everything at the poker table. She then went around and stole a couple of people's purses and wallets. When they confronted her and asked for ID, she wouldn't give it to them because they weren't the police. When the police arrived, she still wouldn't give them her ID or even her name, saying they couldn't arrest her if they didn't know who she was. Needless to say, they arrested her. The last thing the cops asked her was, "Are you at least going to cooperate and walk out with us to the car, or are you going to do this the hard way?" They had to carry her out, and she was kicking the windows in the back of the car the entire time. An older gentleman left the casino I was working at the time to go get the car while his wife went to the washroom. However, instead of getting to the car, he doused himself in gasoline and, well, you know what happened next. Not an employee, but my mum's friend won a slot machine jackpot. Security had to swoop in and save her because she was a very casual gambler and would use like 5 coins then leave. But that night, on one of her first coins, she won the jackpot. The people around her were gambling addicts, and some of them had been working that machine for hours beforehand and felt like it should have been their win. So they tried to attack her for the money, but she did get it in the end. This wouldn't have been a big win either because it was a small place, but still scary how far people will go. Yep, gambler's fallacy actually transforming into a rage when someone else wins is an angle of that way of thinking that I hadn't considered before, but now it seems like an inevitable conclusion in the casino environment. A guy jumped from the 4th story of the parking garage, note in his car stating that he lost everything, savings, retirement, college funds, all of it. I sat next to a guy. He drove a Pepsi truck. He said his mum died and left him $30,000. He had never seen this much money before, so he thought he could turn it into $100,000. We were at the blackjack table. He was getting wasted and crying inconsistently because of his mum, talking about her dying. The cocktail waitresses are taking advantage and egging him on the whole night, and he was tipping them $25 for every drink. In 2 hours, he loses everything. He has this look of nervousness on his face and said his wife was going to murder him if she found out about this because they have 4 kids and wanted to buy a house. He walked out. 10 minutes later, I went to my car and see that he got a DUI. In 24 hours, his mum had died, he got a ton of money, lost it all, will probably get divorced, got a DUI, and was sitting in the back of a cop car with blue balls from the cocktail waitresses. I watched my uncle lose everything at the blackjack table, so he proceeded to the bathroom, came out with his pants off and threw them on the table and said, "Pants plays." The dealer said, "We can't take your pants, sir." The guy said, "Why not? You've taken everything else." Needless to say, he was escorted out of the casino very upset. I've worked in casinos for nearly a decade, and the saddest ones are the players who lose and show no aggression or sadness at all. I had a player who was down $1 million US at the end of a night of roulette, and he had a completely vacant 1,000-yard stare look on his face as he quietly left. Not an employee, but my girlfriend and I were at a local casino for dinner on Saturday, so we decided to take a lap around the playing floor afterwards. We were walking by the blackjack tables and noticed a small crowd around a guy who had a pile of chips in front of him. After it's clear that he'd lost it all to the dealer, he started screaming and that he couldn't lose, and began to slam his head into the table. He ended up leaving in handcuffs. Oh boy, the guy who lost $100 million then sued Caesars for allowing him to continue to gamble at its properties has to be up there. You know, if you had $100 million and just frickin' loved gambling, you could blow $7 to $10K a night every night for the rest of your life and probably clear another $1 to $2 million a year in investment income. And losing a few grand is almost always enough to get all the comped food, drinks, and rooms you'd like. You could live like a king, tossing chips to all the pretty girls, and secure in the knowledge that as long as you stick to your budget, it wouldn't hurt you in the long run. And you could do it as long as you liked. Yet this guy blows it all in a year. I have never understood people like that. I worked as a slot tech, caught my casino cheating customers with a promo wheel with weights, so it was impossible to win. I reported it to a lottery official on site. Nothing was done, and I was fired for a BS reason a week after the wheel was removed. Figured that since everyone is posting about gamblers losing, I'd post something about a casino losing. My uncle worked at a casino for years. He had a lot of horror stories, but the worst by far was this one guy who lost a large sum of money playing cards. The second he lost, he pulled a get out and ended things right there at the table. Not an employee, but there was this one guy who incurred millions in debt from gambling in casinos, went on a rampage, set some casino tables on fire, and killed 37 people in the process. They all died from suffocation and smoke inhalation. I've had a few patrons lose a ton and never come back, only to find out later they drove their car into a tree or put a shotty in their mouth. I do have a good story about the worst I saw someone handle a win. There was this older gentleman who was a regular and a total jerk. Never tipped, never smiled or said hello, and was always in a foul mood. I was watching him play a 50-cent machine one night when he hit 3 jackpot symbols and won $5,000. I went up to him and congratulated him, and I'll never forget the bemused look on his face. When the machine hits a single payout of over $1,200, the machine locks up and won't spin again until an attendant resets it. He just kept hitting buttons in vain, trying to keep playing like a child whose toy stopped working. When I told him that the machine wasn't going to spin until we paid him, his only words were, "Well, can I play this one?" and motioned to the machine next to his. I told him that he could, and he moved over and went straight back to his zombie trance. When we brought his jackpot winnings to him, he huffed and puffed because we'd asked him to stop playing for a minute while we counted out his $5,000. It's like the money didn't even matter. Working at a casino can be a lot of fun, but the worst thing about it is that you know you're a substance dealer, and your whole job is to make sure people keep taking your product. Look, folks, the narrator has already segued into video games once already in the story grouping, but I'd like to stress again how similar some of these gamers are to regular PC or console gamers with their need to do these motions just for the thrill of playing the game itself rather than winning anything. It may not satisfy all of you, but if you're ever in a toss-up between becoming a gambler or a gamer, maybe take the latter. It seems cheaper. I had a roulette spinner tell me that one time a woman came in and gave this other lady a check to cash out and announced, "All right, time for me to win my rent money for the month." The dealer handed her the check back and said, "Ma'am, we're not accepting your money in this hotel. Please take this check and go pay part of your rent with it and work to pay the rest. This is supposed to be a place of fun, not where you risk your life." I saw a drunk guy pour his beer all over the slot machine after losing. Needless to say, security came over where he proceeded to speak only Spanish. They brought out an interpreter, so he refused to speak at that point. They escorted him somewhere else. I work in a city with casinos. Someone unalived themselves and their body was found on top of an elevator in the casino's parking structure. These sort of things happen pretty often in casinos. I wasn't working at the time, but rather playing poker when a guy went super tilt after a bad hand. Anyway, he dove onto the table and thrashed around, scattering the cards and throwing everyone's chip stacks all over the place before security wrestled him out. It took a good 30+ minutes to sort everything out. That's also the day we came to respect just how powerful casino surveillance cameras are. They were able to locate and replace every single chip to exactly where it was before his tantrum. When I see this question, I think of this high roller who lost a crap ton and then proceeded to make an elaborate bomb extortion plot that ultimately failed because his ransom instructions were way too complicated to follow. When I was in Vegas, I was watching a very intense game of blackjack on Fremont Street. The guy bet everything he had, convinced, since he was on a winning streak, that this would be the hand that doubled his winnings. Unshockingly, he busts. As soon as they swooped his chips away, he began slamming his hands on the table, screaming, "What the frick? What the frick?" with his girlfriend, dressed in a cheesy tight mini dress and 7-inch heels, screaming at him and telling him that he promised her a Birkin purse with that money, and crying. An unsuspecting guy accidentally bumped into this irate dude, and that just made the guy lose his crap. A chair went flying, the guy he'd bumped into stepped up and started asking him if he wants a piece of this. Shoves are exchanged, and the screaming starts just as a high heel is thrown straight past the sore loser's face and right into someone else's head. I wanted to stay and watch the throwdown, but my boyfriend yanked me away with a solid nope. Just as well, there were 2 furious-looking Vegas PD officers who were literally shoving their way through the crowd as we stepped away. What's the most bizarre thing you've ever witnessed on a security cam? I worked in a well-known discount retailer a few years ago, and I was friendly with the store detectives. One day, they called me into their camera room to show me some footage they got over the weekend. Several overhead views of a middle-aged man lingering behind various younger women, looking all around, waiting for his window, and then bending down quickly to sniff their rear ends. He was slick. None of them seemed to notice this guy crouched right behind them with his face just a couple of inches from their butts. They got him on camera doing this like 4 or 5 times before they tracked him down and told him to leave the store. Oh boy, I've been on the opposite end of this. I worked IT at a fairly big company. I used a scooter to move around the tile floor building while fixing things from room to room. Well, one day, most of the employees were in a big meeting room meeting about something. I just so happened to need to go into that room to restart a switch. Now, I was really good at drifting around corners on said scooter and had made a habit of doing this around the corners. Yeah, I know, I had this coming. Well, unbeknownst to me, not only were they having a meeting in said room, there was also water spilled right in front of the room. So, right as I drifted around the corner, I hit the water and of course lost control and absolutely slammed into a metal industrial fan they had at the entrance. It was frickin' loud, and of course I caused the whole meeting to stop mid whatever they were talking about. The head presenter saw the whole thing and was doubled over, just laughing his guts out. Most everyone else was just confused. Cue 2 weeks later, I got asked to come help set up something which broke during our meeting, quote, and I showed up to the same room with the same people. As soon as I walked in, the CEO and owner pops open the video footage on the projector for everyone to see. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty damn funny. I unfortunately don't have a copy of the video anywhere that I know of. I think I was given a copy on a flash drive, but this was so many years ago and I've lost track of it since. I honestly have been kicking myself over losing that for a while. I'll try and find it in my boxes of crap if I get the time. Also, it wasn't a highly important meeting. Apparently it was just a bi-weekly meeting the company had to have, and it wasn't a huge company or anything, maybe 100 total employees. Everyone thought it was hilarious, so yeah, that was fortunate. The only downside was the janitor finally figuring out what all the streak marks on the tiles were coming from. It's good to have employees like this to raise morale from time to time with their antics. Also, I wonder what speed that scooter was going for you to be able to drift on it, because to be honest, that doesn't seem safe. Around 2003, I was working at Sam's Club in loss prevention. One day, while watching the tapes, I saw an old man uncomfortably approach the tire mounting area. He proceeded to drop his pants and sit on a stack of tires about 3 high. Got up and walked away a few minutes later. Upon inspection, we discovered that he went number 2 on the stack of tires. Of course, we knew before we saw it because it stank so very badly. A woman I know went to a casino about 2 hours after they opened on a weekday to get tickets for a show. As she was walking by the security desk, 2 women behind it were laughing hysterically. She knew one of the women and asked what was so funny. Turns out a couple of minutes earlier they'd found a pair of women's underwear. That's not too strange in itself, but that early on a weekday in the middle of a main walkway, plus the fact that they're big old granny panties, got them curious, so they were replaying the security tape. Sure enough, a little old lady in a dress with a walker was just walking along when her undies just started to drop off. Every step they fell a little more till they hit the floor, She stepped out of them and kept going. I used to work in the control room at a county jail about 10 years ago. It was our job to control all the automated doors and the security cameras in the facility. This included following officers with the cameras during wellness checks every 15 minutes through our special housing, which involved checking each individual's cell's camera. One day, we were following the officer on the first check after lunch was handed out. We started checking every cell's camera. There were a lot of undressed guys eating sandwiches, but that's nothing unusual, to be honest. And then we got to the 6th or 7th cell. The first thing I saw when the feed came up was blood. There was blood everywhere. The bed, the sink, the toilet, the walls. It's on everything. But the guy was amazingly still on his feet and screaming at the officer when we enabled the intercom. He's screaming, "I don't need it! I'll never need it again, so just take it!" And he throws something at the door. His member. He threw his severed manhood at the door. He broke his lunch tray and used one of the pieces to cut his downstairs thing off. Because, as he saw it, he wasn't going to need it again because he was going to be sentenced to prison. I don't even remember what his charges were, but I remember that he was only looking at about 2 years maximum. I worked in a full-contact haunted house this past Halloween. It was fun hearing the security guards talking about the stuff they saw on monitors. Then the owner said that once he was walking by the monitors when he saw an actor pick a guy up over his head and throw him over his shoulder into the coffin, which was padded and really comfy. The owner was kind of mortified. The security guard nonchalantly said, "Yeah, he's been doing that all night." I used to work security night shift in a 34-floor hotel. While doing my rounds, I walked by the gym to see a huge hole in the wall. We're talking 1 meter by 1.5 meters. With one of our potted ferns, which had been dragged in front to pathetically try to cover it. After reviewing video footage, I found this 300-plus pound man running on the treadmill. The man had probably never used one in his life and seemed to be struggling with the controls. He was running faster and faster and eventually couldn't keep up. He went flying off, rammed into the wall, and stayed down for at least 5 minutes. He eventually got up, covered up the hole with the fern, and walked out sadly. I haven't watched Family Guy in forever, and I can still vividly picture Peter Griffin doing this down to the mannerisms. This is actually kind of sad. That poor man, he must have been humiliated. And yeah, property damage and all. He'd probably been fat-shamed, and this just broke his spirit that little bit more with embarrassment. Imagine laying on that floor, probably hurt and hurting inside. This made me so sad. One place I worked at was a hidden bunker in the middle of nowhere. We were only network security, but we moved there after September 11th because someone in management thought that it would just make a good bit of PR about how secure we kept everything. The car park looked like it was just a random paved area in the middle of fields, hidden down a tiny country lane as the entrances couldn't be seen that easily. We had cameras watching the outside, and one weekend a bunch of expensive cars pulled up, people got out and started filming an adult movie and then just drove off. But the weirdest thing was that we noticed the cows in the field next door always had at least one cow watching the entrance. They took turns. One cow would always start watching the door before another would look away to start eating. We got a little obsessive about trying to find any footage where there wasn't a cow staring at the door, and we could never find any. Saw a trucker drive his huge trailer to the loading station and fit it in like a glove. Perfect. First try. Then falling out of the cabin dead drunk. Damn Russians. This isn't something bizarre in particular, but you should just know that if you fall on camera, everyone that works in the building that a security guard likes will see that video multiple times. If there's security footage in the stairwell in my residential building, I'm willing to bet that they have a tape dedicated to the goofy crap the narrator has done in the stairwell. Dropped fragile groceries, sneaking past the old neighbor that always wants to burst out and talk, putting his glasses on over his contact lenses and falling down the stairs. If those cameras exist, I want the footage played at my funeral. One of my customers, who was drunk, cycling home completely undressed. My boss and I proceeded to follow them, just wetting ourselves laughing, and the funniest bit was when an ambulance started following too. Once my customer had arrived home, the paramedics proceeded to have a chat with him. He was still completely undressed, of course. I work at a car plant, I won't say which company, but every night, this homeless guy hops the fence and sleeps in a car, and he's out by 4 a.m. on the dot. Myself and the other security guards decided not to report it since there's never any damage or things missing from the car. Security officer at a bank, we had cameras on the inside and on the outside, with the idea being that the outdoor cameras could capture a license plate during a heist. Thankfully, that never happened while I was working there. One day, something in the upper right corner of an outdoor camera feed caught my eye. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it looked like a small animal moving back and forth. I sent one of the other officers to investigate, and he came back shaking his head with a big grin on his face. It was a homeless person stroking his eggplant in broad daylight. I used to work night security summers at this recreational campground. Had tent sites and RV hookups, but also cabins, ranging from simple to top of the line with their own hot tubs. There were multiple pools, tennis courts, miniature golf, the works. It was camping for people that didn't want to go camping, basically. One night, a group of young women in their 20s or so, it turned out later it was a bachelorette party, approached the back gate cameras almost in military-style formation. They turned and all 6 flashed their chests at the cameras. The incident became known as the 12-gun salute. I watched a pickup park outside a garage-style storage unit. The driver walked away. Hours later at dusk, another guy crawled out from under a tarp on the bed of the truck, rolled up the storage unit door, rolls an ultralight out of the unit and flies off. Another one, less bizarre and more horrifying, recovered footage of a parking structure collapsing into an occupied shopping center food court to assist with recovering hopefully living victims. I did this program that let you experience life as a police officer while in high school. I had a uniform and everything. I was allowed to work in the jail, but my stepdad worked there too and wouldn't let me work days or in certain parts for fear of harassment. One time I worked an overnight weekend shift in the jail communication and security room. Someone came in with a guitar or banjo, turned on the comm for a couple of isolated rooms, and played a whole bluegrass-type song for the inmates. They were dancing and knee-slapping on camera. It was a great time. Also crazy that you had to unlock each door remotely each time, and the officers couldn't access them on their own. It was a great learning experience, to be honest. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I wasn't watching a camera so much, but was working the front desk. The call button to the main elevators was hard to find because of a poorly placed potted plant. This one lady couldn't find the call button, and before I could walk over to show her where it was, she resorted to knocking on the elevator door. It took all I had to hold my laughter until the elevator closed with her inside. I had access to cameras at my old job, and I'd watch them whenever something interesting happened. One time we had a drunk guy come and squat and then smear his brown matter all over our walls and then simply walk away. Oh boy, have I got some doozies. Got a few years under my belt doing this, so let's go. I watched a guy knock an automatic sliding door completely off the track because he was too busy looking at his phone. We had to call in a techie to fix it. I've watched a poor old lady stop in front of the escalator briefly, and when she moved, there was a brown spot on the floor. She had started to go number 2 and tracked it up the escalator and halfway across the store to the bathroom. When she got done and came out of the bathroom, she continued shopping like nothing had happened. Our store was a biohazard for the rest of the day. I watched one chick pull out a pair of bolt cutters out of her purse to cut the security wire on some handbags. She cut 2 wires and ran off with 4 bags. She got caught later that afternoon. I watched another guy try to steal a spinner of sunglasses only to misjudge which automatic door opened and slammed into it, sending glasses flying fricking everywhere. He got away with the fixture and maybe 4 pairs of glasses. I've got a lot more of these if you guys want them. Yes, please, my goodness, that thief of the century is incredible. I wonder how much street cred he got for those 4 broken pairs of sunnies, the spinner, and the concussion. Here are the other stories that this author promised us. I watched a girl buy a gumball from our machine, proceeded to chew it and stick it to a dress, and then go back to her mum. Once we confronted her about it, she replied, "I didn't do that," and we told her we had it on camera, and she changed it to, "I shouldn't have done that." Turns out her mum just told her not to buy a gumball and was livid. She immediately stopped what she was doing and left with her daughter in tow and told us she'd handle it at home. Never saw them again. Was closing one night, and when we went to roll down the blast door, a giant 3-foot snake fell out of it. Luckily, it was already dead. No one believed us until we played the footage. I've watched people come in, purposefully damage merchandise, then point it out to an employee and try to buy it at a discount. Watched one chick take $800 worth of merchandise into a fitting room and come out with a full shopping bag. When she tried to leave, she ran into someone she knew and decided to wander the store for an hour with them before attempting to leave again. Watched a guy pop the curb in his 4x4 truck and drive all the way to the doors so that his wife could hop out and run in, since it was raining. People are just weird, man. I work weekends at a hospital for a security company with hundreds of cameras all over the hospital. I frequently am assigned to be the officer who watches cameras in the rooms of patients under observation, when they have threats to themselves or nursing staff, and we have access to all the files in our archives. Let me preface my main story with some of the shorter stories from my tenure. There was a patient just snapping and bashing a security guard's head against the doorframe and spilling his blood all over the floor, the Super Bowl, pointed at a waiting TV area, a woman taking a staple out of a book binding, pricking her wrist in a self-deletion attempt, a man on bath salts who came in with his girlfriend's finger in his mouth, screaming in agony because he thought the staff were aliens trying to commit the unspeakable act on him, another guy dropped off in the lobby who had bled out in seconds from a stabbing wound, a clinically dead patient who had taken too much smack, on a stretcher coming back to life flailing like a zombie, hundreds of nurses flirting with doctors and male nurses, nurses with dying patients checking Instagram, we have good cameras, a self-deletion archive, a 150-pound, 5'7" security guard taking down a 6'4", 250-pound patient, dozens of old people falling on their way out of the hospital after being treated for falling. We should note that wheelchairs are always offered in these cases. But anyway, on to our main event. The most bizarre thing I've ever seen in the archives is one of the patients under observation escaping security and making it all the way to his car, completely starkers. This guy was admitted for reasons that I've only heard secondhand. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and he looked normal compared to most of the psychiatric patients that come to the ER. Most likely delusional and a danger to himself, but the key to his story was that he came to the hospital for help with his problems, but didn't know that by telling us he was thinking of self-deleting, that a doctor would order him under observation and he'd be unable to leave the hospital whenever he wished. Now, the process of getting care for mental health issues in an emergency room can take hours because the specialized staff are off-site, and only one is present on campus at any given time. He decided that he couldn't wait and that coming to the ER was a mistake, so he decided to escape. However, this particular patient was smarter than your average case. He took note of the cameras, the angles of each one, and watched the other patients nearby intently as they were escorted by security to a completely stripped special bathroom. As the security guard in the small room that joined with his and a few other patients' rooms opened a door to the adjacent hall where the bathroom was located, the guard would immediately turn his or her attention to the other patients. Next to the bathroom was another observation room, but that guard was usually seated. Both of these officers, he seemed to gather from the smirk on his face, weren't allowed, under any circumstances, to leave their posts unless removed. Anyone running from this officer would have a huge head start before a free officer could be summoned over the radio. All he had to do was get out of reach of the nearest one, and they wouldn't be able to follow. There was one problem with this. The bathroom door opened up towards the seated guard in the hallway. Apparently this guy had devised a solution to his problem and asked the first guard to use the bathroom. Everything went as planned from his point of view. Guard number 1 opened the door, let him walk to the hall, and then went back to the other patients. Guard number 2 remained seated and watched to make sure he actually went in. So he's in the bathroom for almost 10 minutes, and the guard in the hall notices but doesn't change anything about his routine. While the patient was in the bathroom, no camera, he stripped completely down, lubed up his entire body in a thick layer of hand soap and water, and the now fully lubricated patient, I imagine, took a deep breath and flung open the door as hard as he could. The camera files show the seated guard almost falling back out of his rolling chair in surprise. He hadn't even come to terms with the fact that he was going to have to grab a curiously shiny au naturel man when the guy made 5 long strides down the hall at full speed and turned the corner toward the waiting room. The patients in the waiting room just froze in shock, and the guards by the entrance and exit started running toward him. Half a dozen nurses and half a dozen security guards grabbed at him with gloved hands, but every single one of them came up with nothing. None of them could get in front of him, and any attempt to grab the lubed-up streaker failed. Some guards were holding their heads, mouthing, "What the frick?" and others were in full sprint after him. He made it in under 30 seconds out of the hospital and out of the sidewalk that led to the parking garage. He made it all the way to his car, but no further. You see, his keys were in his pants. In short, undressed patient under observation, greased up their entire body in the bathroom and slipped away from security and sprints through the ER to his car, but doesn't have his keys. My God, he must have been embarrassed. What do you even do when you're at that point? Walk back in and apologize? Ask if you can reset and try again? Great story, though. Years ago, when I worked overnight in retail, we had a guy take a Hallmark bag out of the gift card aisle, fill it to the brim with pregnancy tests, and then head towards the exit. He did this big looping arm swing to get the bag over the security antennas, but it didn't work. When the alarm went off, he broke into a run with his arm still straight up and slammed into the entrance door face first while simultaneously sidearm punching the door lintel above his head. He made it out with most of the loot, though. Left behind 3 or 4 pregnancy tests on the floor and some very nice face and fist prints. My coworker and I spent the next months arguing about what he could possibly want with that many pregnancy tests. The most popular theory was that he wanted to be really sure about something, but personally I think he just planned to sell them at a discount to a bodega somewhere. Haha, this reminds me of a story when I was a teenager and the PS2 came out. Me and some friends watched a guy shove one in the front of his pants with the box and everything and try to casually walk out of the front door. When he knew he was busted, he tried to run, but it turned into a weird waddle where he fell face first onto the pavement. I've got 2 decent ones. This is at our backup data center in the suburbs in a commercial office park. Dead quiet, no one even there. Cops mostly chill in the parking lot to sleep, basically. During lunch, this one guy parks in the back and starts eating his lunch. Then the door opens, he runs into the back of the truck, runs back to the door to grab the bag from his lunch, drops his pants, and lets loose a torrent of brown. He just explodes in the middle of the parking lot. There was no way those pants remained unscathed. Then he wipes his butt with his lunch bag. What lunch did he have, you might ask? It was from Portillo's. Personally, I love Portillo's. That bag did not deserve the fate it was given. This was an amazing video and captivated the entire IT staff of like 50 people for at least an hour of reruns. Another time we hired a cleaning service to clean that same office. A guy shows up in a really crappy car, like 18 years old, and parks in back. He then pulls out a giant glass pipe and goes to town for about 10 minutes. We were watching this and laughing, and we call up our man on site, and when this kid comes inside to work, we ask our employee, what does he smell like? So we called up the firm that sent him. It's a small business. Our guy knows the owner, actually. So we're listening to this one side of the conversation, and it goes like this. Hey, Bob, so the cleaning guy showed up. Yep, he's here. Hey, let me ask you something. Do you know this guy really well? Oh, So he's your son. Well, this is awkward. What are your all-you-can-eat buffet horror stories? I boss at a slightly nicer restaurant. On Fridays and Saturdays, we offer a prime rib and crab leg buffet, among a salad bar, hot and cold entrees, and a dessert bar. It's honestly pretty nice, and our buffet runner keeps anyone from doing ungodly things to the buffet. But the one incident that will always stand out to me was when this family of 5 came in. From the moment they came in to the moment they left, they ate as many crab legs as they possibly could. Their server and I were clearing plates off as fast as we could, but every time we'd return it, it seemed like another mountain of crab leg shells would appear in front of each member of that family. I know not how they ate so much, and I honestly can't recall if they ate anything besides the crab. Piles upon piles of shells were left upon the table after they left. It was truly a sight to behold. What's more is after I wiped down the table and came back with settings, I had to get another rag to wipe down the table again because something in the crab leg juice combined with our sanitizer and left a nice milky residue upon the table. Delicious. When I leave this job, I'll never be able to look at crab legs the same way. I had a buddy who was 400 pounds and the guy could put away some food. He went to a casino buffet that was one of the higher-end ones that had crab legs and steak. On his 4th or 5th plate stacked full of crab legs, the manager came out and gave him $250 in free slot play to leave the buffet. There were 2 other guys there and none of them were under 300 pounds. They killed a metric frick ton of food between them, and my friend was putting those other 2 guys to shame. The buffet was higher end, so it was $50 a person, but they easily all ate probably 3 to 4 times that, and my friend probably ate 8 to 10 times worth that in food. He then went on to win just over $100 with that free slot play as well. If you can't beat the casinos at the games, beat them at the bar or buffet. It would have been sick if it held out for more. "The frick you talking about, boss? I'm just getting started. I'm gonna surf and turf this motherfricker into the ground unless I see 4 of those vouchers." Years ago, I worked at an all-you-can-eat country buffet in South Carolina. I was a busboy. One day, I went to a table. It was a mess, as per usual. It looked to be a large family or group of families of about 12 people or so. The thing that stuck in my memory, though, is that whenever they'd finished with what they were going to eat, they'd scrape their plate and use it again. Scrape their plates onto the floor next to the chairs. So next to each chair, there was a 6 to 18-inch pile of chicken bones, crab legs, mashed potatoes, and remnants of baked potatoes, among other things. It was just disgusting. I mean, I know that this was a thing that feasting nobles supposedly did in the Middle Ages, or maybe that was throwing the bones over the shoulders? I just don't understand how this time-traveling Duke and his family ended up in South Carolina of all places. A woman came in with 2 of her kids and had a pretty regular meal. You pay when you leave at our place, and she decided to sneak out with her younger daughter before paying, leaving her underage son alone at the table. We caught on pretty quickly and sent someone after her, who found her in her car in the parking garage, waiting for her son to come as well. She refused to come back and pay, so we had to keep her son hostage until the police came to handle the situation. What some people will do to their kids, I swear. We also found out from her son that she'd stolen one of the manager's key cards and they'd regularly come into the hotel and use the card to go swimming on the top floor pool. She was smart, I'll give her that, but still. My first job was as a dishwasher in an all-you-can-eat fried catfish buffet. People are animals, especially the ones that get far more food off the buffet than they can eat. Then they take the leftovers and pile them on a plate or tray, cover it in ketchup or tartar sauce, then pour their iced tea over the top of that. A lot of the people who did that got at least 2 plates like that a night. Nothing made me hate people like bussing or dishwashing on buffet night at the pizza place I worked at in college. What the frick? Serving the after-church crowd is pretty high up there, though. Jesus Christ himself would have never changed a dirty diaper on the table and left it there, okay, lady? I went as a customer to a Golden Corral. I'm walking to the chocolate fountain and 3 little girls stepped in front of me and all 3 of them just went hands deep in the fountain. The family was the first table by the fountain and all they did was laugh about how cute it was. Employees turned it off immediately. Say what you will about Golden Corral, but they definitely don't play around when it comes to their chocolate fountains. Feels like every story that I hear about them is, fountain was closed because some little crapbag decided to Augustus Gloop the thing. Sure, you might find boogers in their meatloaf, but if someone sneezes on the fountain side of the restaurant, that thing gets shut down like it's Madagascar. The buffet where I live got shut down for serving coyote meat and labeling it as other meats. I picked up some fish and chips recently. I saw that they had all-you-can-eat on Wednesdays. So I asked, what's the most that someone ever… and I was cut off. 18 pieces of fish and 3 plates of fries every single Wednesday, she said, holding up this huge platter to demonstrate the plate size for the chips. So he eats that exact order every week? Yep, and then he goes to different all-you-can-eats every day of the week. He got banned from the Chinese place down the road. My parents owned an all-you-can-eat buffet and I was there every day of my life from 4 a.m. to 2 p.m. My favorite horror story is when a couple came in to eat, obviously. They loved crab legs, and every time my mum puts them out, they took everything. Also, just a reminder, crab legs are expensive. Forget the other customers, these 2 just took it and ate it all. So they're there for maybe 2 hours now and it's getting dark. They've eaten through at least a week's stock of crab legs and my mum finally decides it's enough. She stops putting it out in the buffet and brings individual plates to the customers who wanted it but couldn't get any due to this couple. The couple was livid. They literally flipped the chairs at their table, flipped their plates, bowls, cups, and completely trashed their area. Food was all over the floor, the tables, the chairs. Sticky soda was dripping into the carpet. They left in a hurry, but someone caught their license plate. We called the cops, and I think they charged them with something. I can't remember the aftermath details clearly because I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I'm 20 now. I just remember looking at the mess and feeling really angry that my sister and I had to clean it up with our mum. It was a family-run business, so we didn't have much help. Anyway, that's my horror story. The end. We had a Chinese buffet shut down for a health code violation, which was the employee was cutting veggies while taking a dump. To this day, I still wonder if that means the guy brought a bucket into the kitchen or veggies into the crapper, and honestly, I don't know which is worse. At one point, myself and 2 other family members worked at a Golden Corral, each in a different section, because small towns don't have a lot of job options for high school or college-age kids. I worked in the bakery, which was surprisingly low in horror stories other than the chaos that remained after a large group of children came through. My brother worked the steak section. He got these regulars who would tip him pretty well if he'd prepare blue steaks for them. The very idea of ordering blue steaks from a buffet just, makes me gag. My cousin worked the salad bar. Management would require her to keep seafood items on the bar for long after the point where they'd be safe to consume. I think the record was chilled shrimp from Mother's Day that stayed for over a week and a half. They finally caved and let her toss them when a customer complained about the smell. Oh, sweet God. And the fact that they didn't change the buffet until then implies that people were happily eating the shrimp there right up until that point, and presumably chucking their guts out in the bathroom afterwards. That's our second Golden Corral mention here, a restaurant I hadn't heard of until today and will probably now steer clear of. Not a buffet, but I worked at a pizza bar/parlor that offered a lunch buffet of endless pizza. The lunch ran from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. This gentleman comes in, I think he was homeless. He serves up a sky-high plate of pizza and just goes to town. He stayed from the beginning to the very end to make sure he got his money's worth. Well, his body didn't appreciate being stuffed like a piñata of pizza. He got up and waddled fast to the bathroom, and next thing I know, I'm being told that he had liquid crap trailing behind him to the bathroom and inside the same room. I was informed by my boss about the incident. I told him I was just heading out for a break. I was not about to clean that up. Not a worker, but I went to Hometown Buffet, and the kid in front of me was slightly shorter than the buffet bar, but had his hands in the yellow jello, just massaging it. Then his mum came by and snatched him away, but didn't say anything while a guy came and made himself a bowl of jello. 10-year-old me was too appalled to say anything. I haven't eaten jello since then. I was once at an old country buffet, waiting patiently to get some mac and cheese. The kid in front of me piled his plate high and then started tapping the serving spoon to get all of the cheesy goodness free from the confines of the spoon. Once he was satisfied with his handiwork, he licked said spoon clean. I didn't have any mac and cheese, and I haven't been back since. I didn't work at an all-you-can-eat buffet, but my sister did. The buffet itself was on the first floor, so you had to either take the stairs or the elevator to your seat. Once there was a lady who was carrying a tray with a whole lot of stuff on it downstairs. Glasses, plates, and a whole lot more junk. My sister asked the lady if she needed any assistance, to which the lady replied, "You assume because I'm fat I need help?" My sister didn't react. A few seconds later, the lady fell down the stairs. There was blood and food everywhere. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a coworker that briefly managed Orion's buffet. He said it was fairly common for people to gorge themselves and then purge in the restroom and start eating again so that they could get their money's worth. So I work in an all-you-can-eat using tablets. This is, according to my boss, based on a Japanese kind of restaurant. We serve mostly Asian food, from Chinese to Japanese and even some Korean. The premise is that people order their food in rounds and then we bring the food to their table when it's ready. We always warn customers beforehand that if they leave food behind because they ordered too much, they'll still have to pay, depends on what they left behind. We've seen people try the weirdest stuff if it comes to not paying. People dumping food in their handbags, people shoving it in their mouths, then going to the loo and flushing it, putting hair on it and blaming us for it. We've seen them pull this stuff on camera, and when we actually catch them doing it, they blame us for it and refuse to pay. Someone let it come down to the police to sort it out sometimes. There have been multiple occasions on which they were involved to solve the problem for just €5. I guess some people's greed has no extent. A college friend works at a Chinese buffet. He said they caught a regular dipping pizza in the wonton soup, like in the queue and not at his table and eating it right there at the buffet. Bite, dip, bite, dip, bite, dip. After the 4th time in a month he did it, management finally kicked him out. Not a worker, but I once saw a grown man have a childlike meltdown over the fact that he showed up to soup plantation too late and missed out on the biscuits and gravy. A long time ago, my mum and I picked a friend of hers up and we went to a local Chinese food buffet. This place had a thing where you could get a pound of food for $5 in a takeout container instead of sitting and eating at the restaurant if you want. So that was our plan. The three of us were browsing around the buffet line with our takeout containers, adding what we wanted to them, and then I noticed that my friend's mum was doing something frickin' disgusting. He was eating a chicken wing, like right in front of the buffet line, hiding his face behind his takeout container. And then he took the chicken bone and put it back in the buffet tray. I walked over to my mum and told her what he was doing, and at first she thought I was joking. So she walked over to him and now he's standing there eating a slice of watermelon right off the buffet and then putting the rind back in the tray. So my mum was like, "What the frick are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, don't worry, I do this all the time. They never notice." Of course, both me and mum are panicking, worried that they're going to call the cops or something because of this idiot. We basically pretended not to know him and continued to fill up our containers the right way. After a couple of minutes, one of the employees walks up to my mum and tells her that they noticed what the guy was doing, and they noticed we were also uncomfortable about it and didn't intend to blame us. But they warned her that if she doesn't get him to pay for the food in his container and to leave immediately, they'll be calling the cops. So of course my mum tells him that we need to go, and he just brushes it off like, "I don't care, they're not going to do anything." Well, me and my mum walked up to the front, paid for our containers, apologized, and walked out and left him there. A minute later, you could see and hear him shouting at the staff. He throws his container on the ground and food splatters everywhere. He storms out, shouting insults as he leaves, and of course gives them a, "I'm never coming back." To which they reply, "You're not allowed in here no more, we'll call the cops." So we're standing out by the car waiting for him, and of course we yell at him for being a piece of crap. We get in the car, and the next thing you know, this mother fricker starts pulling chicken wings and Chinese donuts out of his frickin' pockets and eating them. We dropped him off at home and never spoke to him again. That is the definition of one of those moments in life where you realize that you need new friends. I have to believe that maybe you hadn't hung out with him that much before if you didn't realize that something was a bit quirky about him. I managed a buffet in a casino in Reno for a few months. Had this family come in, mum, dad, 2 little kids. I got called over to the table because the mum had chucked up on her plate the table and wanted us to take it away and clean things up. I asked if she was okay, and she said she always blows chunks when she eats cheese. She had gotten herself an enchilada. It was a Mexican theme night. What the frick, lady? Enchiladas pretty much always have cheese. I told her I'd have to call janitorial because none of my staff was trained to handle biohazards. She didn't understand why I couldn't just take it. Janitorial came and couldn't clean up because she refused to move from the table, so janitorial left. She calls me over and starts yelling at me. Dad starts yelling too. Apparently she wanted to keep eating after chucking up, which I thought was really gross. I had them sit at another table so they could all keep eating. Janitorial came back and cleaned the other table. Finally, they go to leave and decide to make a huge scene in front of the restaurant and demand their money back. I refuse. The dad gets in my face and starts shouting that I'm just a racist white B-word and his wife makes loads more money than I do. I call security and they storm out, pulling pictures off the wall and shattering them on the floor. And dad also picked up a vase and broke it. The 2 kids were running around and banging on the walls. Security finally shows up after they ran off. I had to do a report and they were put on the 86 list. I frickin' hate people. I was standing behind a woman at a hometown buffet. She was getting lasagna or something, basically a really cheesy pasta thing that when you lift the serving utensil, a lot of cheese hangs on. I witnessed her lift her pasta, twirl all the excess cheese that was connected around her index finger, and there was a lot, clip it off with her thumbnail and then fling it back into the pasta dish. I knew I shouldn't have been at hometown buffet in the first place, but this solidified my stance to never go back. I worked as a server at a Chinese buffet and 4 things come to mind instantly. First, a middle-aged woman who chucked up on her table and blamed it on giving herself the wrong insulin dose. The 4 mountains of food she destroyed probably contributed too. Profusely apologized and tipped me $1. 2, I tried to pick up a dirty plate off a table that had a big pile of hibachi sauce and grease on it. The customer stopped me and said, "That's the best part," and then proceeded to drink the sauce like it was the milk after a bowl of cereal. A young mother complained to me because the crab meat and cheese that we serve on the buffet made her child sick and they threw up. Her child was an infant. Not even a year old. I'm no childcare expert, but baked artificial crab meat and mozzarella can't be good for a baby. The restaurant was also raided by ICE one morning shortly before opening. The entire back of house and one of our managers were deported. Back of the house was half Chinese and half Latin American. I was just a witness, but I saw how a woman came in with about 5 kids and she made them all sit at a table while she got food, even if they seemed old enough to get it themselves. She just grabbed 2 trays, placed 3 plates on both of them, and literally poured all the chicken nuggets onto one plate, so it was a huge mountain. She did the same to the other 5 dishes and left 5 pans that were full or almost full before she came, empty. Needless to say, people were annoyed, especially when she did it multiple times with other dishes, and would glare at people if she saw them taking food from dishes that she probably wanted. At one point, I worked for a pizza place that used to have a day buffet that I'd make pizzas for. One time, 2 huge guys came in the moment we opened for the buffet. The manager on duty dropped the first 2 pizzas down on the buffet, turned to grab the next 2, turned back, and both pizzas were gone. A few minutes later, both guys walked back up and each took an entire pizza again and walked back to continue eating. They proceeded to do this over and over, grabbing an entire pizza each for themselves for the entire 3 hours that we were offering the buffet. That was one hell of a day. Okay, and to answer some of the questions I'm being asked, they were big as in morbidly obese, and Pizza Hut 2011 with regular dough. Not thin crust, medium pizzas, which were 12 inches, you get the idea. I used to work at an all-you-can-eat buffet. I'd usually be the one who cleans up after people once closing hours had passed. Essentially, I was the de facto janitor of the place. This one time, I had to clean the bathrooms after the place closed. No problems in the female bathrooms, but when I went into the male restroom, the image was burned into my retina instantly. An old man was lying on the floor, face down in a puddle of muck. Not just any sewage muck, but opaque black muck. It had the color of motor oil. It smelled awful too, like a mixture of doo-doo and rotting durian. It certainly didn't help that the liquid wasn't just smeared all over the floor, but spread across the walls too. There were frickin' handprints across the wall, presumably when the geezer was trying to stand himself up. I peered into the toilet. There was more of that brown liquid, along with chunks of corny doo-doo. There's also this fluid in your digestion called chyme. It's basically the thing right before food turns into brown, the pulpy, acidic liquid with partially digested food in it. I could see scraps of chicken breast and sauce mixed in there with the pulpy chyme. As for the old guy, well, it turns out he didn't merely faint, he had actually deceased. I was in a room with a fresh, decomposing body in the stages of algor mortis. He had his pants off, presumably he had crapped himself to death, but I don't know. The guy had emptied himself like one of those cement mixers you'd see in a cartoon, except you just replace the cement with a liquid that embodies death itself. Needless to say, I, like him, emptied my digestive contents, just from the opposite end that he did. After that, I quit. Screw that place, man. There was a fairly expensive restaurant in Dallas in the 80s called Southern Kitchen. About $25 per person back then with the food served to the table. Really good stuff. They were famous for cinnamon rolls. The owner said he'd seen many women ruin expensive purses hiding those rolls. Man, I miss that place. The professor of my college microbiology class was also a director at the state health department in charge of inspecting restaurants. The first thing she told us on day 1 was never, ever eat at an all-you-can-eat buffet. What out-of-control situation did nobody call emergency services about? My co-worker's story of how he found out he had a heart defect jumps out for me. He used to ride his bike to work all the time at his old job. One day, just on his road to work, he drops on the side of the road, fainting. He was out for an hour or so before he came to. He was pretty beat up, nothing major but cuts and bruises everywhere. When he came to, no one was around him. People were just driving by and walking around. No one stopped to help, no one stopped to call an ambulance. He went to the doctor and got surgery done for an artificial heart valve. This one was only a few years back. Driving along a suburban road one night, and a guy wearing only his undies ran up to our cop car and threw a very large sofa cushion at us. As we slowed down to find out why he had thrown said cushion, he tried to jump into the back of the car. We got out and had a chat with the poor guy who told us that he'd used about an 8-ball of poor quality booger sugar and wanted to get our attention to help him. Kicker was he'd been running around the suburban streets all crazed for about 30 minutes and nobody thought it was odd enough to call us. To be fair, it wasn't the nicest area. I was responding to a disturbance call in a trailer park that turned out to be BS. As I was leaving, I noticed a giant puddle of blood on the ground near a different trailer. Upon further inspection, I realized that there was blood all over one of the doors, complete with smeared handprints and blood dripping off the doorknob. It looked like a frickin' massacre. I started pounding on the door, and then this junkie comes out and starts yelling at me for waking her up. I ask her if she's hurt, and she said she wasn't. She then proceeds to go nuts about all the blood. She has no idea where it came from. I followed the ungodly amount of red stuff to a trailer about a block down where there was a giant party taking place. I ask the group of guys standing outside where the injured person is, and they all go G-code on me and say that they don't know what I'm talking about, while standing in the blood trail. I push past and continue down the road to Oz, where at the end of it I find a guy in what used to be an all-white outfit that's now dark red attempting to control his massive head bleed on his own. I later discovered that he'd been trying to break into that other trailer when he drunkenly cut his head on the window that he broke out. That's an awful lot of blood loss. I can't imagine blocking off authorities from that sort of medical emergency, no matter how much you distrust the popo. Wild. There was a quadruple murder in a residential area here in Sweden back in 1980, with several witnesses that heard and saw the incident. The attacker shot a girl by accident and then shot another guy in the following moments. They fired a total of 12 shots over the course of several hours. Shanked 2 others to death with a kitchen knife, he finished everything off with dragging the girl outside because he felt guilty for killing her, so that someone would find her and call the paramedics, but realized while dragging her that she was gone and nothing could be done, so he threw her down an elevator shaft. The whole ordeal lasted for 4 hours and nobody called the cops, even though 12 shots were fired and screams were heard. The killer was arrested 2 days later and was killed 18 years later by the son of the first guy that got killed. Former law enforcement officer. I worked a late shift and was driving home and decided to stop for some breakfast at a Waffle House. I noticed a few people flagging me down as I pulled into the parking lot, which was shared by an auto repair shop. They pointed me to the back, so I pulled over and turned my spotlight on. On the back side of the repair shop, there was a dumpster, and there was a man laying down beside it behind the fence. I could see his feet. Then another homeless man walked out with a bowl and literally walked right by my car towards the Waffle House. This guy was soaked, by the way. So I walked over to the man laying down and he was unresponsive. I call in and the EMTs arrive and this guy is definitely gone. I still have to this day no idea how or why. I have the homeless guy waiting for me next to the Waffle House and I ask him what happened and said, "He was out cold. I was pouring water on him to keep him warm." Video from the auto shop shows the guy walking and collapsing next to the dumpster. He wasn't shot or anything, so who knows, heart attack, stroke, something, and then just laying there for 45 minutes. The homeless guy walked over to a water hose beside the Waffle House, filled a bowl up and poured water on him because it was slightly cool outside and didn't want him to get too cold. The water was from a cold faucet, by the way. Literally nothing ever came close to the weirdness of that night in my entire career. Paramedic here. My partner and I were at our post, which was in the parking lot of a strip mall that had a bunch of stores and one bar, which was known to be pretty sketchy. My partner was taking a little nap, it was around 1 a.m., and I was watching a movie on my phone, waiting for a call. Eventually, I notice a few people coming out of the bar and just sort of lingering in the parking lot. A few more people come out, one lights up a cigarette, and they all just stand around. I go back to my movie, and 20 minutes later I notice that there's now a much larger group lingering outside of the bar. Nothing strange was happening, but I thought it was weird that they'd been there for so long, so I decided to check it out. I woke up my angry partner to have him pull our rig closer to the group. As we approach with our lights on, the group notices us and starts to break apart. A few people scatter and I see that in the middle of the group there's a person on the ground motionless. My partner and I jump out and ask what's going on. Someone in the group goes, "This guy is wasted, man. He just stumbled out here and fell asleep on the ground." I shout to the man on the ground and he doesn't respond. I check for a pulse and there is none. I start CPR while my partner gets out our jump bag and notifies dispatch. For a full 30 minutes, people had just stood around looking at this dead guy on the ground, some smoking cigarettes and none doing anything about it. There wasn't even a noticeable commotion. No one asked if he'd needed help or called anyone, and they probably never would have. The guy was cool to the touch by the time we got to him and down for at least 30 minutes. We went through the motions, but there was no saving him. We transported and he was pronounced at the hospital within 15 minutes. How frickin' hard is it to ask someone if they're okay or dial 911? How was not a single person in that group not alarmed by seeing a man sleeping on the ground in a parking lot? I've had similar variations of this scene happen at least 3 times while on duty. People just don't give a frick. Part of my job is to inspect and investigate issues in child and daycare centers. Staff members duct-taped a 1-year-old toddler to a chair because they wouldn't sleep at nap time. One staff member witnessed the other staff do this to the child. 3 other staff saw the child taped to the chair. The owner saw it as well. No one said anything or reported to the police. My office is civil, not criminal. I called the local jurisdiction and submitted all the documentation I'd found. The parent picked up the child and couldn't figure out why the child's clothes had sticky residue on them. Boy, was she surprised when she'd learned what happened to her baby. This is pretty common where I work. No one calls the police. Probably the most extreme was a shots fired call, extremely common on a certain street that we don't really go down without backup. We drive through and don't see anything, then maybe 10 minutes later we get an anonymous call about a shootout inside a vacant house. We find the door wide open, covered in blood. We make entry and find an absolute bloodbath. Blood, drugs, and casings everywhere. We recover a piece that had been fired, and there was evidence people had been dragged out. We only got the one call about it, and no one showed up at the hospital later, shot. The narrator did do a bit of digging to see where this author was from, and all I can say, it's wild enough that this can happen anywhere in the world without injured or deceased persons showing up on some sort of register, and the fact that it can happen in a first world country is even more mind-blowing. Where the frick are our social priorities at? I'm not in law enforcement anymore, but I was for about 12 years in a large city. When I was a patrolman, I got a call about someone firing off fireworks in a strip mall at 2 a.m. These were common calls, so we'd usually just go to check the area and clear the call. I checked the parking lot and didn't find anything, but I noticed the lights were on at one of the strip mall businesses. I won't say what business it was, but it was owned by a pretty prominent local businessman. Anyways, I go out to check and found the front door unlocked, which in itself was suspicious. We had a lot of burglaries in that area, so I asked dispatch to call a rep for the business. I was clearing the building and found the owner and several other people, all really prominent, in a back room where a poker table was set up. One of the guys was sitting down and had a pile of coats on his lap, which was really weird, and he was acting like he was in pain. I saw blood droplets under his chair and asked him what was wrong. He broke down and moved the coats and then revealed he had a massive bullet wound in his thigh. Long story short, these guys had a high-stakes poker game every week and someone tried to rob it and things went sideways. The guy robbing it shot this guy in the leg, which some citizen heard and called in a fireworks call. The guys involved in the game weren't going to call the cops and were arranging to have a doctor come in and treat him off the books because gambling is illegal in the state that I worked in, but we honestly wouldn't have given a crap. We actually caught the guy that did it, but the DA wouldn't prosecute because the victim and witnesses didn't want to testify or be involved. The victim recovered fine. One of the guys who I interviewed told me they were robbed of over 30 grand. Oh, there are so many. There's the usual drive-by shootings, gang violence and stuff. Then there's the infuriating things like the domestic matters. Though, to be completely honest, the most absurd situation in which no one called the police or 911 was when my crazy neighbors across the street had their father-in-law have a heart attack on their front lawn during a barbecue. The guy's son was having the mother of all tantrums, shoving people, screaming, rolling on the ground, pulling up grass. They literally broke a window, all while shrieking at the top of his voice, "Please God, don't take my dad!" The other relatives allowed this spectacle to unfold before their eyes while they formed a semicircle around this dude's seemingly lifeless body. I finally looked out of my window, opened it, and shouted if anyone had called 911. I got about 20 blank stares. I called for them, and the crazy son tried to attack the paramedics while they were loading his dad into the ambulance. Called the cops for them as well. Common sense just really isn't all that common as it turns out. The dad didn't make it. The party just resumed once the son got carted off in cuffs and the ambulance had left. The son was definitely old enough to know better. He was in his early to mid-30s at the time of his tantrum. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Started my 4 to midnight shift by heading directly to get a coffee. Beautiful summer, people everywhere. I pull into the parking space and see a guy just lying on the ground in front of a park bench. I jumped out of my cruiser, grabbed my first aid bag, and called it in. The guy was conscious but not really responsive. It sounds like a movie, but we were doing the old blink if you can hear me deal. The rescue finally arrived and took him to the hospital. I found out later that the guy had suffered a grand mal seizure and was still postictal when I rolled up on him. The frustrating part was the dozens of people milling around that couldn't even bother themselves to call 911, never mind find out if the guy was okay. There was a video a while back, and I'm sure other similar ones floating around, of a woman in public transit who appeared to be on something. Swaying side to side, drooling, spaced out look. People were making nasty comments and her young daughter was crying hysterically. Turns out the lady was having a seizure. No one wanted to get involved to see if she was okay. It was easier to say nasty things and film her. Seizures aren't always falling on the ground and flailing. They can include symptoms that look like the person is on something. People with diabetes can also have similar reactions with low blood sugar. My brother-in-law was on his way home from the night shift a few months ago and happened to drive past a house that was just casually on fire. He ran up to the door, beat on it with no answer, broke the door down, and ended up rescuing a woman and her children. I'm not sure how many kids there were. They were all fast asleep and had no idea the house was on fire. My apartment got broken into a few years ago. It was one of those off-campus college apartments. We called the police, who came at about 4:30 a.m. Our neighbors were playing loud music, which was pretty typical for them. When they arrived, they were taking the report when the officer I was talking to asked if our neighbors were always that loud, and I told him it was only on Saturday and Thursdays, and how it didn't really bother us. But before the cops left, they knocked and pounded until the neighbors finally answered. When they opened the door, there was a horse or donkey in the living room, several studio cameras, and 3 or 4 people who were apparently filming a donkey show. I know those cops were probably expecting some green herb and maybe a few minors drinking, but not a frickin' donkey show. You know, given how a lot of these other stories have gone, I was expecting a dead body, maybe an untreated medical episode happening ignored in the middle of the floor. I didn't expect that, so well done, guys. I do mountain bike patrol in a small, medium-sized city. Was just riding one morning just after rush hour and I spotted a little kid, probably about 3 or 4 years old, standing on the side of the road with no parents in sight. I stopped and asked him where his parents were and he just kinda shrugged. Called it in and some guy ran out of some townhomes across the street and said the little dude was standing there for a few hours and the guy in the house was watching him to keep an eye on him. There were people around and everything, but we never got a call for it. Long story short, this kid had just wandered out of the room he and his mum were staying in nearby and wandered onto the street. The place was a shelter for women and he was able to get past the manager and a court police officer. The mum had passed away from too many substances 3 days prior, and when the little guy got hungry, he went out of the room and wandered out to the street. No one even went to check on her either, despite the smell. Because some people have asked, I'll clarify this shelter wasn't a homeless shelter, it was a shelter designed to house domestic victims. Women and children who temporarily had nowhere else to go. Mostly it was designed to help bring them into the system by giving them a place to stay until their social workers and caseworkers could get them better accommodations. Kind of like a more secure hotel. The women were free to leave and do their own thing, and there wasn't a full-service staff like in a homeless shelter or rehab facility. To finish, please go out and push your legislators and the people in power to fix our healthcare and rehabilitation system. Many millions of people suffer from our lack of ability to help those in need, especially the mentally ill and the neglected members of our society. Push for the end of the war on substances to stop the cycle. I'm an EMT. We were waiting at a light right as we were headed back to the station for our end of the shift. We saw a man running like Usain Bolt across the crosswalk to beat the light and a woman chasing him. My partner and I both look at each other and he says, "She's gonna get hit." And sure as crap, the car in the rightmost lane just guns it as the light turns green, and the next thing we see is flip-flops flying and a pair of legs in the air. The female was plowed over and landed on her face in the street. We immediately turn on our lights and hop out of the ambulance. When we get to this lady, she's unconscious, she's gone number 1 in herself, and is bleeding from multiple lacerations on her limbs and a nasty head wound. My partner, who is a paramedic, starts his assessment as I go to grab a backboard and C-collar and call it into dispatch. She wakes up and immediately starts screaming about her boyfriend leaving her. She stands up and tries to run after him and face plants onto the curb and proceeds to lose a tooth. We finally calmed her down enough to get her onto the gurney. Mind you, she wouldn't listen and kept trying to walk around after suffering a couple of head injuries. Once we got her into the back of the ambulance and out of the road into a nearby parking lot, the driver that hit her rolls up. By now, firefighters are on the scene and asking what the heck is going on. We give them the lowdown and my partner tells them that we can handle it, so they leave, confused and somewhat trepidatious. We talked to this woman for a while, insisting that she needs to go to the hospital, but she keeps saying that she can't go and needs to find her boyfriend. Meanwhile, the driver who hit her is apologizing to me and saying that she wants to help any way she can. The woman keeps saying she can't go to the hospital. After we got her cleaned up and bandaged all the wounds, she asks if we can take her to her boyfriend's house. Well, as an EMT, I can do one of two things, either take you to the hospital or leave you where you are. She refuses transport vehemently, so my partner and I tell her we can't take her anywhere. She proceeds to then hop out of the ambulance and ask the driver who just hit her if she would take her to her boyfriend's house if she didn't call the cops. Sure as crap, before we can even radio in that the patient was refusing transport to the hospital, she's rolling away in the car that just hit her and tossed her 8 feet in the air. It's not the craziest story, but one of the few that we just happened to be there for. This is my uncle's story from early 90s Chicago. An elderly couple called in what they said sounded like a shot from the apartment below them. My uncle and his partner arrive on the scene and enter the apartment, weapons drawn. Standard protocol for a possible firefight in progress. Right in the entryway is what's left of a middle-aged Italian gentleman who apparently made the decision to not continue his criminal career by getting himself in the head with a .45. He's obviously gone. According to my uncle, his face was half gone, nose missing, one eye, and the other hanging from what's left of the socket. My uncle's partner goes out to the squad car to radio for the cleanup crew, those guys that come in and scoop up the dead bits, and my uncle is standing in the door making sure no one enters the apartment until they arrive. About 5 minutes pass and my uncle hears what sounds like something moving inside the apartment. He figures the guy probably has a cat or dog. Your pet will eat you if you die, and they are hungry, generally, so he heads to shoo it back away so it doesn't further damage this guy's body. He opens the door and the mother fricker with his face blown in half is standing there. My uncle reached for his sidearm and nearly shot the guy, genuinely thinking he was a zombie or something. And the dude just collapses again. Not like a fall into a slump sort of collapsed, like falling straight back and hitting the ground with a thud. My uncle, after regaining his composure, radios his partner to call for EMS, and then he proceeds to check the guy's pulse. Nothing. When EMS arrived, they said that there was no way the guy should have survived the initial shot, and they would have assumed he was dead too based on the amount of damage. My uncle says in his entire 20-year career, which included several firefights and car chases, that he never felt more scared than when he opened the door and saw that guy, who by all rights should have been dead, just standing there. After reading these posts, one particular instance comes to mind. While working for the MEO, we were called for a badly decomposed decedent. She was in the bathroom of a housing facility. Her remains had leaked into the air ducting and flooring. EMS had been called because someone had slipped and fallen on her liquefaction in the hallway. Look, I realize that a lot of these folks probably had bad run-ins with the police, but to let someone rot like that astounded me. You could smell it from outside the facility, and it took someone injuring themselves to have the authorities called. There's still a pic of me in a ghost suit on our local wall of shame because I ended up in the bathtub after almost adding myself to the injured list while slipping across the bathroom. I moved out of Racine, Wisconsin in the 90s because in the last 3 weeks I lived there were 24 drive-by shootings and 3 of those happened when there were already cops at the scene for unrelated reasons. I was off duty playing poker with some neighbors and friends. One of the guys at the table is a hard-as-nails Vietnam veteran. In the middle of a hand, he downs his glass of scotch, hits himself in the chest and lights a cigarette, stands up and says, "Well, I'm having a heart attack." He then walks out and drives to the hospital. Everyone thought he was joking. Sure enough, he had had and survived a heart attack. Years ago, I was at a wedding and the groom was a cop. There was one guest at the wedding who was the +1 of a friend of the bride. The reception was so much fun, with several hours of open bar at a big hotel. The +1 guest was walking around, inviting people to go out to his car to smoke some of the devil's lettuce. At one point, he walked up to a couple of guys and invited them, to which they responded, "No thanks, we're cops." Damn, that was a fun night. When did you stop, chuckle, and think to yourself, "I'm in danger"? When a car jumped the median and was barreling right towards me doing well over 70. Luckily, horsepower saved me from death. My first instinct was to floor it. At least have them hit the rear door and panels instead of the driver's side door. I was the only one in the car. When I was 7, I was playfully pushing a sheep and he pushed forward. Next thing I know, I'm against a wall, sheep head on my chest, and 5 seconds later I realize he's too strong for me. I literally thought I was going to die right there. Death by floof. Driving 50 miles per hour in a little VW Jetta and a huge SUV was stopped at a crossroad up ahead. Apparently, they didn't see me and they started across the road. Thank God I hit the gas instead of the brake, or I probably would have T-boned them. Instead, they smashed my back left tire and sent me spinning to a stop in the opposite lane of traffic. It was also really lucky I had no oncoming cars in that moment. Funny though, I was so dazed I remember thinking, who was that screaming? I'm the only one in the car. Then I realized that it was me. Such a strange feeling. A homeless girl grabbed me from a bar and said she needed an ambulance because her friend had taken too much of something. I followed her and started phoning one. She led me to an abandoned building. All that was going through my mind was, someone needs help. When she led me to some stairs, she said we needed to go up them, and my brain finally kicked in and I realized it could easily be a trap. Even if it wasn't, I wasn't going to walk into a smack den, and I was far enough into the building where escape wasn't easy. I leaned over a candle and set my t-shirt on fire. I thought it was really interesting and turned to my friends, saying, "Hey, look everyone, my t-shirt's on fire." Fortunately, one of them had more presence of mind than I did and put it out. About 19,000 feet or 5.7 kilometers up in Tanzania. Felt incredibly drowsy while taking a rest and I started dreaming. The guide slapped me on the arm. "Don't sleep, you die." The chuckle and "I'm in danger" came when I realized I felt so awful that I might actually choose sleep anyway. It was altitude sickness. I chucked up my undigested breakfast 10 minutes later and felt a bit better. Yep, it takes resources for our bodies to turn food into energy. I'm a little concerned about what would happen if you were unable to eat because of the altitude, though. Good thing you had a decent guide with you. They're there to save us adventure tourist idiots from ourselves. In Iraq in 2004, my unit was tasked with pushing from Hit to Fallujah in order to find and destroy Muqtada al-Sadr's Mahdi army. In one of the cities we cleared, we were about to assault a 5-story building that Intel had informed us was defended by more than 100 insurgents. We were stacked up outside a medium-high wall that surrounded the building, and I was carrying my saw, which is like a 20-pound weapon. I got a boost over the wall and immediately fell into and got stuck in a thorny bush. I remember thinking, oh man, what a stupid way to die, as I started waiting to get shot at. Turns out that this insurgent stronghold was actually a school with 2 friendly dudes in it. In short, Intel sucks. Later on in that same mission, we were doing a sneaky night patrol and we had to cross a highway that had crash barriers in lines on the median. I tried to roll over the barrier wearing a backpack, and it got perfectly lodged in the space between the barriers. Stuck there like a turtle while I tried to whisper shout to someone to come save me. A smackhead got out of prison and went to visit his girlfriend. She'd moved out about 2 years earlier and I'd moved in. So at 1 a.m. there's a clearly drunk nutjob, possibly also on substances, trying to break down my front door while my wife and kids are asleep, somehow. I hadn't put the bolts on the door yet as I was only just on my way to bed when he turned up. It was kind of funny, but I still got the cricket bat out just in case. Hey, the same thing happened to me. I was walking into my apartment building one day when I saw a guy start to walk in. I'd only been gone like 5 minutes, so I yelled at him, "Get the frick out of my apartment!" So this big Hispanic dude turns back towards me and says he's looking for so-and-so. I tell him they don't live here anymore, even though I occasionally get his junk mail. Big dude tells me he's fresh out of jail and the former resident owes him money. I tell him that's fine, but he doesn't live here anymore. He looks and tells me that my apartment looks like his and that if I'm covering for him, he'll be coming back. I tell the guy that's fine and that I won't see him later because once again, he doesn't live here. There was this time on a school bus, we had a new driver. The area is pretty hilly, and in this route we had the steep 50-foot drop from where the bus turned around with a 3-point turn. But the bus driver just kept backing up. Closer and closer, we almost went off the cliff. I'm sure that if we measured, it was within a foot. I started looking at exits, how fast I could run to the front or the side exit. Man, we were all screaming in terror. Good times. I took an out-of-bounds ski trail that looked fun by myself because intelligence is my strong suit. Came upon a tall cliff with a flat landing that I knew I couldn't make on skis, but I'd come too far to hike back to the main path. Took my skis off, tossed them over, and climbed down. Hurt my legs, but nothing serious. Continued on. Several minutes later, came upon a sign pointing towards a 20-kilometer bike trail ending God knows where. It was around that time I realized I could end up lost in the back country of a ski resort with no cell reception. Decided to hike in the opposite direction the sign was pointing since it was uphill and seemed more likely to take me back to the main trail. After several whispered swears and a good half hour of biking uphill, and across a sketchy-looking wooden bridge, through deep snow in ski boots holding my skis, I arrived at a populated ski run. I now make sure to have someone with me for all backcountry-related adventures. That way, if I die, I can bring them down with me. I was doing aid work in Croatia in the late 90s, only a few years after the war had ended. Our group was staying in a small village about an hour outside of Zagreb, which had been caught up in the conflict. Lots of shelled houses, mines in the countryside, even the main bridge had been blown up, so residents had to use an army makeshift bridge if they wanted to cross the river. We'd made friends with the locals and they took us down to the river where we had a fun time swimming and mucking about. I totally underestimated the river current and my ability to swim. So I start trying to cross the river and the current just picks me up. Whoosh! And suddenly I'm on my butt trying to swim against it. No deal. When I realized this, I started trying to get footing, but I'm being swept downstream and my feet are literally hitting rocks, no grip at all. It seemed like forever, but it was probably about 5 to 10 seconds. I hit a shallow calm patch of the river where I could stand up. When the guys came over, they were telling me it was no big deal, but had I been swept a little bit further down the stream, I would have hit a heavily mined area and probably been blown to bits. I metaphorically crapped myself. That's the closest I've come to losing my life. Really shook me up. I worked as an animator in a hotel. During the season, the mini club daycare is filled with kids, but post-season there's not even one kid in the hotel. So, post-season, one older lady and one middle-aged guy entered the empty daycare. The lady quickly explains to me that this guy is her mentally disabled son, who's mentally around 3 or 4 years old. He saw the daycare and really wanted to play there. Usually I wouldn't accept that, but there were no kids around, so I was actually happy that I'll be occupied for a while. He was really endearing, and we often watched Mickey Mouse DVDs since he was a big fan. After a few days of me hanging out with him, his mother came to pick him up and asked me how he was. I replied that he was nice as always, to which she replied, "Good, because he can get so very violent and aggressive sometimes." It sent chills down my spine, realizing that I was lucky, but that he'll also be coming to the mini club for the rest of their vacation. So there I was, day after day, playing with this guy twice as big as me, completely alone, doing everything he wanted and being more than careful that he just didn't get mad. Look, I get that this elderly woman had spent her lifetime caring and providing for her son at this point, but maybe that's the sort of information you disclose up front if there's any danger involved. Don't just drop him off and peace out even if you feel you deserve to. It's a hard situation to judge people for, but I think at least some warning about moods was warranted. When I decided to explore some lava tubes on an extinct volcano, Rangitoto if you're curious. I did this with no torch and bad footwear. It was extremely dark in there with no cell phone reception. I got completely disoriented and had to feel my way out because my phone was not as bright as I thought. No one knew where I was and I could have been in serious trouble. Stupidest thing that I've done recently. Me and my good friend Felix, both German, were traveling with an Interrail ticket through Europe. In Serbia, we were in a train which was going really slow and stopping at every really little town and village. For some reason, the train got shorter and shorter every other station because they were uncoupling a wagon here and there. So everyone moved to the first 2 wagons because they were most likely to arrive at the final destination. Felix and I were already in the second wagon in a closed cabin where there's a bench on the left and right. We were both sitting on the left bench having a cigarette when things suddenly got intense. 3 obviously drunk men came into that cabin. At first, they only asked for a cigarette, which we gave them, but after a few minutes, they started discussing more and more intensely. I could feel they were talking about us. So I asked Felix, whose father is Serbian, if he could understand them. He was pretty serious at that moment and told me that the 2 of them wanted to rob us, and one wanted to wait until after the train ride. Felix gave me a continuous update about what they were talking about. They were guessing how much money we might have and still discussing when to do the robbery. Their discussion heated up and at one point they stopped completely. I was wondering what happened and then suddenly it all went black. We were in a frickin' tunnel. I was totally flexed and expected to get the crap beaten out of me. They were only talking like 3 sentences. I asked Felix, "Are they going to do it now?" He said, "I'm not sure." After what felt like 10 but probably was 2 minutes, the light came back and I was sitting there like a frickin' Jackie Chan on my bench, prepared to fight in the dark. They knew now that we kind of knew. They decided to follow us once we got to our destination so we could kind of chill during the ride. At our destination, we just sprinted into the next taxi and told him to go to the next city as fast as possible. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Calling an Uber in Houston right in the middle of a downpour. As a Brit who was staying there for work, I was only vaguely aware of the dangers of flash flooding, and being from a country with no real inclement weather, I obviously didn't take it as seriously as I should have. As Texas natives will no doubt confirm, when it rains hard there. At least it did that morning. I remember trying to call an Uber on the app, and a few drivers in a row cancelled on me. I was desperately trying to get back to my friend's house. I'd just spent the night with a woman, and I was doing the walk of shame. She did offer me to stay and wait it out at her place, but the rain wasn't too bad at that point and only really became dangerous midway through my journey home. It really did come out of nowhere and she couldn't have known. In any case, it would have been beyond awkward to hang around the whole day with someone I'd literally just met 12 hours previously. I would have swum home through gator-infested waters if I'd had to, so I didn't really have much choice and just persisted in requesting a driver. The guy who eventually did show up was a friendly Nigerian fellow who probably didn't really consider how dangerous it was. In the short journey from the front door to the cab, I got so soaked it looked like I'd been thrown in a lake. We were both chuckling like, haha, look at all this rain, until it got so bad that we literally couldn't see 1 yard in front of the car. By this point, we were on the freeway and basically trapped. And then we both started getting alerts on the Uber app that we were in a danger zone and to vacate immediately. Then we saw the water rising on the side of the freeway and cars starting to lose control. That's when both of our smiles dropped and it was like, oh yeah, people die in these conditions. We both might not be going home today. It probably sounds silly to people who have to deal with all this stuff all the time, but that was the only time in my life I've experienced the genuine fear of, there's a very real danger I could either drown or be sleeping in a community center this evening. Eventually, he did get me home and I've never been so grateful. He got a big tip from me and a hug. Decided to go on a day hike in a 17,000-acre wilderness area that I'd never visited before. Didn't tell anyone my plans, didn't take a map, didn't pack anything more than a Cliff Bar and a water bottle. There was no cell service and I didn't see anyone else all day. The trail system turned out to be pretty complex, and after a couple of hours I realized I was entirely lost. I tried to keep my panic down and kept just picking trails and walking until around dusk, where I happened to pop out onto a dirt road and was able to follow that road a couple of miles back to my car. I still kick myself for that one. I don't know what the frick I was thinking. At my best friend's going-away party, drunker than I've ever been before or since, barely able to stand, when the bros collectively decided to pick me up and throw me in the pool. All I could do was grab a nearby screen door with one white-knuckled hand. The host is a big burly musclehead who'd just made sergeant. He stopped them and told them they were idiots. I was too drunk to swim, clearly. And then I blacked out. At first, the narrator was confused as to why a screen door was in the pool unless this was some kind of budget Titanic-themed party. Then I realized that you never actually made it to the pool, which in hindsight is probably a very good thing for everyone involved. When I was in med school and did my psych rotation, the first thing we were told was to never split up from our partner, so just in case of a dangerous situation with a patient, we'd have a second person there to help. I went to do an assessment on a patient. He seemed perfectly normal, and my partner judged that now would be a good time to use the restroom. The patient and I were having a pleasant-as-could-be conversation. He asks me to look at his drawings, which he had proudly hung up on the wall. I obliged. I like art as much as the next girl. I look, and they're really nice. Then I turn around and find that the second thing we were told never to do, which is let the patient get between us and the doorway, had happened. And he was not seeming so friendly anymore, which is when I thought to myself, well, darn it, if I'm in a pickle now. This man is telling me he has to get out of here. I have to help him. And all of I don't even hear what at this point because I'm realizing how potentially screwed I am. But then I realized that I'd also done the third thing which we were told never to do, which was to keep our cell phones on us on the floor. I was just hoping at this point that I could keep this guy talking a little while I call my preceptor to save my dumb butt. My friend was at the same clinical site the following semester, and the preceptor used that as a cautionary tale to emphasize the first two rules and get rid of the third one. I swam from a beach out to a buoy, not even that far, maybe 200 meters from the beach. I'm a strong swimmer, so I thought I'd manage it easily. Something about the cold water and the current? I don't know, I was really struggling coming back with even trying to swim horizontally to the beach. I went all lightheaded and felt really tired, then just started thinking that this is it, I'm gonna drown, and how stupid I've been. Floated there for a bit, laughed to myself like a maniac about how dumb I was dying like this. Eventually, I snapped out of it and started swimming again, ended up crawling back onto the beach. My partner asked how the sea was, and I just croaked, "Fine." We were on a patrol in Afghanistan in 2008 when we came under heavy fire. Our fire team took cover behind a low, loose stone and mud wall, unable to return any effective suppressing fire. The wall was slowly getting lower and smaller as it was peppered by small arms fire, and we knew that air support was coming, but it felt like we were in some crappy Indiana Jones scene. In those situations, it's the humor that stops you from crapping yourself. Me and my friend were scaling a cliff. He wanted to go around, which would take about an hour. I said we could climb it. Fast forward 10 minutes and I'm hanging off a cliff, 30 feet tall, and hanging onto it for dear life with 2 hands. I found the situation quite funny. I was so confident in my ability to climb it, and I lost my footing just as I got to the top. I was holding onto the rock for what felt like forever, most likely less than 2 minutes, until he managed to climb up and pull my butt up there. It was 3 years ago, I believe, when I was still in active service in Switzerland. I'm part of a tank crew. That day I was the designated loader for the cannon. We were doing live fire exercises, and as we fired, one of the gas extractor seals blew up. What this is, basically, is a circular rubber ring around the gas tube of the cannon. If you look up a Leopard A2 tank, it's the thick tube at the base of the cannon. It acts as a seal to prevent smoke backlash into the crew compartment, and instead vents it outside. This meant that the sealed crew compartment filled up with smoke and the acrid smell of cordite and essentially blinded us all. So here I am, a 25-kilo high-explosive shell in my arms that you don't want to drop on the floor, blinded and winded by smoke, thinking, well, this is how I die, apparently. Managed to fumble around, slot the shell back into the carry tray as well as engage the coaxial machine gun fan. It's mounted under the machine gun ejection port, and it pulled the smoke outwards when turned on. And I opened the top hatch to let it cycle out. Fun times. The first World Trade Center bombing. Ground floor, the explosion knocks me to my knees. I thought 2 subway trains had crashed below us. A couple of seconds later, the second explosion. I knew this was going to be a problem. I learned years later there was no second explosion. The tower just rang like a bell. It was the building reverberating back to the original bomb site. Went to work somewhere else not long after that. I was watching Archer on my laptop in college, had my headphones on, and in the episode there was an alarm going off. After about 3 episodes, I finally realized, hey, wait, why can I still hear that alarm? I looked up and saw that the end of my corridor was completely engulfed in flames, and the flames were coming at me quickly. Best part was like 40 people just walked by me after the alarm started and let me sit there. Nobody even bothered to warn me. I didn't take the chicken out of the freezer like she'd asked, and then my mum pulled into the driveway. I hunted wild pigs, or razorbacks, in Australia. Since I was a teenager, they wouldn't give me a rifle. They set a line of teenagers up with long poles and what looked like metal trash can lids to bang and make noise in a line formation. We stomp forward, pigs run the other way towards the hunters. In theory. Occasionally, a male, the ones with the horns, will have enough testosterone stored in their sacks to charge at us. That's when we're supposed to take the pole and push them away. Yeah, nah. Like 14-year-old idiot me dressed in a leather apron is going to push this 400-pound pork monster off me with a stick. Brown Man here took a trip to Big Bend National Park a few years ago with a bunch of green herb. Got to my campsite in view of the Rio Grande, high as frick, and realized I'm on federal land on the US-Mexico border with a not insubstantial quantity of a regulated substance. I've made a huge mistake. One night when I was in active addiction, I was drinking heavily and also taking a hefty dose of oxycodone. I felt my heart slow down to a crawl and I was having a lot of trouble breathing. Very easily could have died there, but I found it partly comedic in that moment. Don't do substances, kids. Was on a school trip to Austria, skiing. A guy who didn't like me and repeatedly picked on me came into my room with all of his mates and pushed me to a window. I thought it was just a joke until he put a knife to my throat. I instantly stopped laughing. He stared at me for a good 30 seconds and walked out of my room, which didn't have a lock on the door. I didn't sleep that night. That moment when you're gunning it up a hill on an ATV and you're about 90 degrees before the pinnacle and you let off the gas too early because you thought you were going to flip backwards and everything perpetually slows and then goes completely still before the hill crest and it's quiet and you know Newton's law, so you just chuckle and think, well, I guess we're going to roll backwards now and hope for the best. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.